Chapter 1977. Cheng Yaojin was stunned. There was nothing wrong with what he said. The bow had just been made. If he pulled it, it would be ruined. Was Feng Zi praising him for his strength or mocking him for ruining the bow? He thought for a moment but did not say anything. However, he agreed with Feng Zi and said, "You're right. With my strength, it will definitely be ruined if I pull it." He then turned to Cheng Chumo and glared at him. "Lao Tzu is so strong, but you can't even pull the bow. What's the use of you?" As he spoke, he slapped Cheng Chumo. The latter screamed in fear, but he did not dare to dodge. He could only look at Zhang Feng for help. Zhang Feng naturally knew what was going on. He didn't want to save Iron Bull, but he still had to make the bow. He had no choice but to persuade him, "Old Shen, that's enough. It's not Iron Bull's fault that the bow can't be drawn. There are still important things that haven't been installed." Hearing this, Cheng Yaojin's interest was piqued. He stopped what he was doing and asked with a smile, "What else do you need to install?" When Zhang Feng saw that Cheng Yaojin had stopped moving, he no longer paid attention to him. Instead, he looked at Arjunan and said with a serious face, "Take out 2 thin steel pipes. They must be so long that they can fit between the handle and the bowstring." Arjunan frowned. He had some doubts, but he did not plan to say anything. He glanced at the bow and made a rough estimation. Then he turned and left. Cheng Yaojin was not satisfied. He asked, "Feng Zi, what are you going to do with the steel pipes?" "You'll know in a moment." Zhang Feng did not plan to explain. He waved his hand impatiently. Then he seemed to think of something and continued, "You can't continue to hit Iron Bull." As soon as he said that, Cheng Chumo looked at Zhang Feng as if he was looking at his second parent. If he were a woman, he would have given himself to Zhang Feng. On the other hand, Zhang Sunchong and the others were not brothers at all. When his father hit him, he didn't even dare to fart. Feng Zi was more reliable. Thinking of this, he looked at Feng Zi with even more passion and gratitude. However, Zhang Feng's next sentence caused him to be taken aback. "If you want to forge Iron Bull, go home and do it slowly. Don't make the forging workshop bleed." "This?" Cheng Chumo cried. He originally thought that Feng Zi had found his conscience. She was going to plead for him. In the end, however, this guy was afraid that old Cheng would beat him up on the mountain. He wanted to cry, but he couldn't. He couldn't help but shift his gaze to this damned old man. Cheng Yaojin gave Zhang Feng a knowing look and said with a smile, "I understand. I won't hit him anymore. Let's save some face for this kid first." As soon as he finished speaking, Arcanon also came back. He was holding several steel pipes in his hand. They were of different thicknesses and lengths. "Director, I've brought the things back. How do you think I should use them?" Zhang Feng took one of the steel pipes and carefully examined it. Then he looked at everyone and said, "Old Sheng, these 2 steel pipes are tied to the 2 auxiliary bowstrings. The other end is facing the bow handle." Cheng Yaojin was a little dumbfounded. Why were there steel pipes tied to the bowstrings? Although these 2 auxiliary bowstrings were not as powerful as the main bowstring, why were there still steel pipes tied to them? This was something that had never happened before. He asked in confusion, "Feng Zi, what are you doing? Why do you need to tie steel pipes to them?" "Increasing pressure." Zhang Feng replied solemnly and looked at the bow and arrow. "Don't think that there are 3 bowstrings. In fact, they all exert force together, so the pressure will be gathered together. The purpose of this steel pipe is to disperse the pressure. Then, the 3 bowstrings exert force together. The pressure increases and the power increases at the same time." Everyone felt a headache coming on. Especially Cheng Yaojin. He didn't know what pressure was at all. He just wanted Feng Zi to explain the use of the steel pipe and whether it was good or not. In the end, this guy talked a lot and didn't seem to intend to stop. This was a headache. He quickly waved his hand. "Stop, stop, stop. Feng Zi, we don't understand what you're saying." "I didn't expect you to understand in the first place." Zhang Feng rolled his eyes at Cheng Yaojin. He didn't intend to talk about it, but this guy asked. Well, then he would talk about it. Moreover, he wasn't talking to old Cheng, because he knew that this guy wouldn't understand. So, he was talking to old Cheng. This guy still had a righteous look on his face. Zhang Feng said, "These things are too profound. It's fine if you don't understand. Now let's get to work. After that, he glanced at everyone, and finally his eyes fell on Qing Yaojin. He said, "Old Cheng, tie these 2 steel pipes to the 2 auxiliary bowstrings. The other end faces the bow handle." Qing Yaojin said, "Oh." He didn't know if it was because he had been taught a lesson or something else. This time, he didn't ask any questions and just started working. Soon, the steel pipes were fixed. He looked at Zhang Feng. "Feng Zi, what do we do now?" Chapter 1978. Zhang Feng didn't answer. Instead, he looked at Arjunan and said seriously, "First, apply some cow glue to the end of the bow and fix it. Then, take out the horn and stick it on the bow. Apply deer glue to the outer layer, horse glue to the inner layer, and finally, rhino glue to fix it." Arjunan nodded and called for Chung Chumo and the others to help. Then he started working. This was a huge project, and it was also the last few steps. He couldn't finish it alone. Chung Chumo and the others were happy to help. They all came forward to help. One of them stuck the horn, and the other applied the glue. Soon, the project was completed. "Dean, it's done. What do we do now?" Arjunan asked Zhang Feng with the bow and arrow. "Let me see." Zhang Feng took the bow and arrow, looked at it, and nodded with satisfaction. "There's no problem. Now, we just have to wait for the glue to dry." After that, he glanced at everyone. "We still have to continue. Arjunan, you continue to work with Old Cheng and Tinyu. Remember to use a different kind of pulley." "Then what are you going to do?" Qing Yaojin couldn't help but ask. "Vigorous." Zhang Feng rolled his eyes at Qing Yaojin. This guy didn't use his brain at all. How could he make arrows without a bow? Qing Yaojin suddenly understood. He smiled and said, "Okay, you go." Zhang Feng snorted and turned to Zhang Sun and Du Go. "You two come with me to make the bow and arrow. Don't worry about anything else." After that, he turned and walked out of the cave. Zhang Sun and Du Go looked at each other and followed him out. In fact, the 2 of them were useless here. Old Cheng and Old Cheng could basically handle it. With Arjunan's help, there wouldn't be any problem. Outside the cave, Zhang Feng pointed to a pile of leftover log materials and said to Zhang Sun and the other 2, "The 2 of you, cut all of these wood into long strips, about the size of a pinky finger and the length of an arm. Do you understand?" After he finished speaking, he did not receive any response from the 2. Zhang Feng turned to look at them. He saw Zhang Sun Chong and Du Go standing there in a daze, not knowing what they were doing. Zhang Feng was a little confused. He pushed the 2 of them and said, "What are you doing?" Zhang Sun was pulled back to reality with a bitter expression. In fact, when he first came out with Zhang Feng, he was very happy. After all, he didn't have to face that demon king Qing Yaojin. It was worth being happy about. But not Qing thought of sawing wood when he came out. He was instantly unhappy. He wanted to reject Feng Zi, but he didn't know what to say, so he just stood there in a daze. It was the same for Du Go. He originally thought that there would be something fun to do, but in the end, all he got was to saw wood. One had to know that there were still a bunch of blisters on his hand when he was sawing wood. Now that he had to saw again, he was very unwilling. So, he looked bitterly at Zhang Feng and begged, "Feng Zi, can you change to someone else? Look at my hand, it's full of blisters." As he spoke, he opened his hands and showed them to Zhang Feng. Zhang Sun Chong saw this and hurriedly opened his hands. He said with a bitter face, "Feng Zi, change to someone else. I really can't stand it. You 2 bastards, I asked you to do some work and you're still here talking about conditions?" Zhang Feng frowned and said with dissatisfaction, "Do you not want the bow and arrow?" Zhang Sun Chong's heart skipped a beat. How could he not want the bow and arrow? It could be said that he wanted it the most. But Feng Zi wanted him to work again. His hands were already blistered. He was a little hesitant and turned to look at Du Go. The latter also looked over. His eyes were very determined, as if he was determined to get it. Zhang Sun Chong sighed and could only say, "All right, let's go." As he spoke, he picked up the saw and walked towards the wood. Du Go had already expressed his position just now. Naturally, he was unwilling to give up and followed. Zhang Feng sneered in his heart. In fact, he had already guessed that these guys were unwilling to give up. After all, the bow had already been formed. A few arrows shouldn't be difficult. As for those words, it was just to force these guys. Otherwise, with these guys' temperaments, they would definitely not be willing to do it. Sure enough, these guys were working very hard now. Zhang Feng took out a cigarette from his waist and slowly lit it. He casually found a stone stall and sat down, watching the free labor in front of him. After about a quarter of an hour, Zhang Sunchong ran to Zhang Feng with a bundle of long strips. "Feng Zi, it's done." "Oh." Zhang Feng stepped on the cigarette butt and glanced at the wooden strips. "Put these wooden strips on the fire and light them up. The process of making the bow handle is the same as before." Zhang Sunchong had a bitter expression on his face. He thought that was it. Who would have thought that he still had to do it? He had no way to refute. He could only pick up the firewood and reenact the scene just now. Fortunately, Dugo was still quite proactive. He had picked up the firewood in advance. The two of them roasted the wooden strips while warming the fire. Needless to say, these two guys were quite efficient. Who knew if they wanted to end this bitter life as soon as possible or if they wanted to get the bow and arrow? They quickly finished roasting some of the wooden strips. They brought them to Zhang Feng and said excitedly, "Feng Zi, it's done." Chapter 1979. Zhang Feng looked at the two of them with disdain. "Since you're done, let's go back." The rest of the project had to be completed in the cave because the required materials had not been taken out. The group returned to the cave. As Zhang Feng approached, he saw something shocking. Cheng Yaojin and the others had made more than one bow. He counted carefully. There were more than 50 bows in total. The corner of his mouth twitched. He hurriedly said, "Why did you make so many bows?" Dean Alkinen stepped forward, feeling wronged. "It was old Qin, enough." Zhang Feng interrupted. He then looked at Cheng Yaojin and said with some dissatisfaction, "Old Qin, this was all your idea, right?" Judging from Alkinen's reaction, this must have been old Chen's idea. Besides, Alkinen didn't have the guts to do so. They had just started experimenting with the bows. It was useless to make so many. It was impossible that he didn't know. However, Cheng Yaojin didn't think so. He was thinking about how to get more bows and arrows and then send them out. Although he didn't know the power of the bows and arrows, based on his experience, they definitely wouldn't be bad. Therefore, he made a few more without Feng Zi's consent. Alkinen tried to stop him, but how could he stop this devil? In the end, he still wallowed in the mire. He had already prepared the speech for Feng Zi's return. Now, he began to speak with assurance. "Feng Zi, you didn't say how many you were going to make when you left. Besides, making more will only be beneficial. It'll also be beneficial for the experiment later." Zhang Feng was so angry that his face turned red. He didn't know how to say it. This guy's words were somewhat irrefutable. At first glance, it sounded quite reasonable. He was about to curse, but he swallowed back the words he wanted to say. He could only say, "Do you know how many materials have been wasted?" Sigh. As he spoke, he let out a long sigh. He felt like he wanted to say something but stopped. It wasn't because he couldn't say it, but he felt that it was useless no matter how much he said. Moreover, old Cheng's personality was like this. Would he listen to anything you said? Sure enough, Cheng Yaojin was still carefree. He put his hand on Zhang Feng's shoulder and said with a smile, "Feng Zi, it's just a little more. There's no need for that, no need for that." Zhang Feng shrugged him off with a look of disgust. He didn't want to waste any more time talking to this guy. It would be a waste of saliva anyway. He looked at Arcanon and said, "Go and take out the arrowheads from last time, as well as the arrow feathers." After making bows and arrows last time, there were still some arrowheads and other things left over. This time they could be used. Arcanon accepted the order and gave Cheng Yaojin a resentful look before leaving. Cheng Yaojin played with the bows and arrows as if they were his treasures. He didn't want to put them down. He wasn't afraid that Feng Zi would do anything. After all, the bows and arrows had been made. What he needed to do now was to think about how to get them out. Thinking about this, he couldn't help but put on a wretched smile. He looked at Zhang Feng and said, "Feng Zi, now that there are so many bows and arrows, what are you going to do?" "What am I going to do?" Zhang Feng was a little confused. It wasn't because of anything else, but because he was confused about why this guy asked this. This obviously had nothing to do with him. Could it be that he wanted a share of the profits? Thinking about this, he deliberately said in a foreign accent, "Then what do you think we should do? After all, there are so many bows and arrows. It's not good to waste them." Cheng Yaojin was delighted. He had taken the bait. Even though he was delighted, he deliberately put on a calm expression. "How about this? We don't know the effects of the bows and arrows yet. When these bows and arrows are finished, let me try this batch first. What do you think?" Zhang Feng suddenly understood. So this was what this old guy was thinking. He wanted to take some home? This wasn't impossible. He could even promote composite bows. In the future, he could mass-produce them. Perhaps he could even put them in the military camp. But they hadn't tested them yet. If there were any problems, wouldn't it be a slap in the face? Moreover, this old guy only wanted to benefit from this. He didn't want to give anything. How could this be? He had to at least get some benefits. Thinking about this, he put on a troubled expression. "It's not impossible. It's just that we haven't tested them yet. Let's talk about it after the test. Also, don't you want to take out something?" Cheng Yaojin was stunned. He didn't expect this kid to be so stingy. He wasn't even willing to take out a test product? He even wanted to negotiate? He wanted him to take out something? How could this be? After all, the power of the bows hadn't been tested yet. What if he lost money? He was about to refuse when Arjunan came back. He held a pile of arrows and said with a smile, "Dean, I've brought them back." Zhang Feng checked the arrows and other things, then handed them back to Arjunan. With a serious face, he said, "It's the same as last time. But this time, the ends of the arrows need to be fixed with fish glue. Why don't you use beef glue? Will fish gelatin work?" Chapter 1980. Cheng Yaojin asked. In his opinion, cow gelatin and deer gelatin were much more precious than fish gelatin. They would definitely be more effective. Unexpectedly, Zhang Feng didn't care at all. He sneered, "What do you know? Fish gelatin is the best. It's also the one with the highest adhesion." Cheng Yaojin curled his lips and didn't say anything. He couldn't find any other reason to refute. So what if he let Fengzi show off? Anyway, his goal was to get the bow and arrows. Zhang Feng didn't say much. He looked at Arjunan and said, "Start making them now." After that, he looked at Chungchumo and the others and snorted. "You guys, come over and help. Don't just stand there like idiots." Chungchumo and the others looked at each other, then reluctantly walked over. They took the arrows and other things from Arjunan and started making them. The arrows themselves weren't as difficult as the bows. They just needed to place the feathers and the arrowheads on the ends and fix them with fish gelatin. This process wasn't difficult at all for them, who had just made bows. In a short while, Arjunan and Chungchumo were done. Zhang Feng glanced at the neatly arranged arrows and nodded. "Not bad. Now we just need to wait for the bow and arrows to dry. Let's wait for it." After that, he didn't care about the others' reaction. He found a stool and sat down. He took out a cigarette from his waist and lit it. He slowly smoked. Cheng Yaojin looked at Zhang Feng's leisurely face. He rolled his eyes as if he was thinking of something. After a while, he walked up to him with a smile. "Fengzi, what do you think of the matter just now?" "What matter just now?" Zhang Feng took out the cigarette butt and asked. Cheng Yaojin's eyes flashed with a trace of dissatisfaction, but he quickly covered it up. With a smile on his face, he said, "Just give me some bows and arrows." "Bows and arrows?" Zhang Feng smiled. So this old guy was still thinking of something? However, this stingy character of his was... He smiled and said awkwardly, "Old Chen, it's not that I don't want to give you anything. It's just that you don't want to give me any compensation. You know, these materials are all provided by me, and these workers are all from my cave." Cheng Yaojin felt a headache coming on and wanted to scold Feng Zi for being shameless. This material was clearly from his family, so why did it change when it came out of his mouth? Furthermore, he had also contributed quite a lot of manpower. Iron Bull, Buggy, weren't they humans? He suppressed the anger in his heart and said with a smile, "Fengzi, you're not being kind. These glue are all provided by our Qin family. Also, when we were working just now, we did it ourselves. That's enough. Zhang Feng sneered and said with a little disdain, Buggy and Debing also contributed a portion of the glue, and these two guys also helped just now. How can you take all of it for yourself? Hearing this, Zhang Sun and Du Go's eyes lit up. They cast a grateful look at Zhang Feng. In fact, when Qing Yaojin said this, the two of them wanted to stand up and refute. What did he mean by the Qing family providing glue? Did Lao Tzu not provide glue? However, they didn't dare to say this. In the face of this great demon king who ran amok in Chang, and the title of being a playboy obviously didn't work. Fortunately, Feng Zi helped them vent their anger. Now, they only felt grateful to Feng Zi. There was nothing else. However, Zhang Feng obviously didn't notice this. He was still talking with assurance. Old Cheng, you did help a little. At most, I'll give you a bow and arrows later. Your Qin family will give you 2 bows and arrows. That should be enough, right? 2 bows? Cheng Yaojin was stunned. Lao Tzu wanted all of it. What did you mean by giving Lao Tzu 2 bows? Were you trying to get rid of a beggar? His face was a little ugly. Feng Zi, did we discuss this just now? You'll give me all the bows and arrows? Give you all of it? Zhang Feng's eyes widened. They did discuss this just now, but he didn't agree. Wasn't this guy thinking too much? Now he wanted it? He said with some dissatisfaction, Old Chen, your appetite is really big. I didn't agree to it just now. Why are you bringing it up now? Cheng Yaojin didn't care and laughed. You didn't agree to it just now. Aren't I here to discuss it with you now? How about it? It's not impossible to give it to you. Zhang Feng's eyes turned as if he was thinking about something. After a while, he seemed to have thought of something. He smiled and said, How about this? I can give it to you. However, you have to give me your glue in exchange. 1 tael of glue for a bow. You can make the arrows yourself. He naturally wouldn't give the bow and arrows away so easily. In fact, he already knew what Old Chen was thinking. If he didn't get something, he would feel sorry for himself. Glue was a necessity for making bows and arrows. There was no harm in exchanging some. Cheng Yaojin's face was bitter. There wasn't much glue in the house, and it was stolen. How could he give it to Feng Zi? Moreover, this guy's price was quite high. 1 tael of glue for a bow? Chapter 1981. How much glue would it take? He looked bitter, but he didn't want to give up. Feng Zi, can you make an exception? Your price is a bit high. Zhang Feng refused and said righteously, You know how difficult it is to make this thing. I'm just asking you to give me some glue, and you're still so hesitant. If you don't want it, just say it. Cheng Yaojin was very unhappy when he heard this. What did he mean by hesitant to give him some glue? This was cow glue, deer glue, and rhinoceros glue. Each of them could be said to be expensive. Who dared to say that it could be taken out casually? If it was someone else who said this, he would definitely go up and slap them. However, this was Zhang Feng and he was a bit scared. He could only suppress the resentment in his heart and said unhappily, Feng Zi, it's not like you don't know how expensive this glue is. It's not so easy to get. How about this? You can change it to something else. I'll definitely get it for you. Expensive? Zhang Feng sneered in his heart. Lao Tzu wanted expensive things. He didn't want anything else. Besides, what was the use of anything else besides glue? Glue could be used to make bows and arrows. Even if it was a little inferior, it could still be eaten. It was also good to beautify the 2 girls. Why should he change it? Thinking about this, he smiled. I'm afraid that won't work. I don't want anything else except glue. Cheng Yaojin was stunned. He originally thought that he could have a good talk with this kid. However, this kid was stubborn. Was he going to give up on bows and arrows? That wouldn't do. If such a good thing were to be given to others for free, it would be a big loss. However, Feng Zi was stubborn. Was he going to snatch it? That didn't seem to work. There were so many people in the cave. He and Iron Bull might not be a match for them. Besides, Iron Bull was a dog who sided with outsiders. He was simply unreliable. If this matter was reported to the Emperor, the Emperor? If the Emperor made a move, he might be able to persuade this stubborn guy. After making up his mind, he turned to look at Cheng Chumo. Cheng Chumo shuddered and felt uncomfortable all over because he felt that his father's gaze was not good. The last time he looked at him like that was in the warehouse. He did not dare to say anything. At this time, Qing Yaojin was about to speak. He quietly leaned over to Cheng Chumo's ear, but the latter evaded his gaze, seemingly unwilling to listen. He narrowed his eyes and pulled Cheng Chumo's ear, not caring whether the latter was willing or not. He whispered in his ear, "Brat, go out and find His Majesty right now." Looking for the Emperor? Cheng Chumo was stunned. Why do you want to find the Emperor? Could it be that this damned old man was plotting something? He turned his head and asked softly, "Dad, why?" "Is that what you're asking?" Cheng Yaojin's expression changed. He immediately rewarded Cheng Chumo with a knock on the head and snorted, "You just have to do as I say. Otherwise, when you get home, Lao Tzu will not plead for you." Hearing this, Cheng Chumo's expression changed. He had taken a risk to steal the glue from the warehouse. If old Cheng did not plead for him, then he would be finished when he got back. He quickly said, "Okay, I promise you." After saying this, he turned his head and glanced at Zhang Feng. He did not know why his father wanted him to find His Majesty. What was even more puzzling was that his father was acting so sneakily, as if he was afraid that others would find out. Could it be that no one else knew about this? Feng Zi was also kept in the dark? Forget it, he could not even protect himself. Thinking this, he turned around and walked towards the entrance of the cave. However, this attracted Zhang Feng's attention. He asked curiously, "Tai Niu, where are you going?" Cheng Chumo turned his head and was about to find an excuse to cover it up when Qing Yaojin stepped forward with a smile and said, "Feng Zi, Tai Niu was afraid that his mother would be worried, so he went home to tell her that he was safe." Since he had already planned to let Tai Niu go out, he had already thought of an excuse. However, Zhang Feng did not seem to believe him. He glanced at Cheng Chumo with some doubt, but in the end, he waved his hand and said, "Go ahead. Be careful on the way." In fact, he did not completely believe old Cheng's words because he knew what kind of person he was. He would rather believe Tai Niu than old Cheng. Tai Niu's constipated expression also made him even more suspicious. However, when he thought about how the father and son could not cause any trouble, he felt relieved. Cheng Chumo saw that Zhang Feng did not have any doubts, so he turned around and left. After all, old Cheng's threat was a little strong, and he had no choice but to obey. Cheng Yaojin saw that Zhang Feng was still a little doubtful, so he quickly pulled him by the shoulder and said with a smile, Feng Zi, we should go take a look at the bow and arrow." Zhang Feng nodded and did not think too much about it. He turned around and picked up a bow and arrow to check it. The glue on the surface was all dry. He reached out and pulled the bowstring. It had to be said that the bowstring was very strong. He used all his strength and only pulled it lightly. After confirming that there was no problem, he turned around and glanced at everyone. "The bow is fine. Then can we experiment now?" Zhang Sun jumped up excitedly. He had been looking forward to it for a long time and couldn't wait to get his hands on it immediately. Chapter 1982. Du Go was also looking at Zhang Feng with a face full of excitement. To be more precise, he was looking at the bow in Zhang Feng's hand. Although he was the weakest among them, his desire to win was no less than the others. Now that the bow had been made, he couldn't wait any longer. "Feng Zi, let's go test it out." Zhang Feng nodded and handed the bow to Du Go. "Everyone take the bow. We'll go test it out." Okay, Du Go held the bow high, his face full of excitement. Zhang Sun didn't stay idle either. He picked up the bow on the ground and raised it high. Cheng Yaojin coldly snorted and picked up a bow. He looked at Zhang Feng with hidden bitterness. He was standing right in front of Zhang Feng, but this brat had given the bow to Du Go. It was obvious that he was looking down on him. When he went out later, he would teach this brat a lesson. As he was thinking, he looked up and saw that Zhang Feng and the others had already picked up their bows and were preparing to leave the cave. He hurriedly said, "Feng Zi, wait for old man." The group walked out of the cave. Zhang Feng glanced at the empty space and looked at Arcanon. "Same as before. Put up a few signs in front of us and draw them. It's 1 li away." Arcanon nodded and left. It didn't take long for the preparations to be completed. Zhang Feng turned to look at Zhang Sun and the others, who were having fun. "Don't play with the bow over there. Shoot this." As he spoke, he pointed at the target. This target is similar to Huqiong's target, but it's a bit bigger. It's 1 li away. It's just right for you to practice your archery. 1 li? Cheng Yaojin frowned and looked at the target with disdain. What's the point of 1 li? You're setting up a target 3 li away for old man. Back in the day, old man. Stop. Zhang Feng couldn't stand it anymore and said sarcastically, what do you mean back in the day? Old Chen, stop bragging. Others might not know you, but do you think I don't know you? Don't you usually just play with the dog? Well, once we go up the mountain, what's the big deal? He had heard from Iron Bull that Elder Chen usually had nothing to do at home. All he did was play every day. How could he miss the past? Moreover, even if he did, his limbs would have degenerated by now. After all, his body of fat wasn't just for show. Cheng Yaojin couldn't sit still after hearing Feng Zi's denial. He glared at Feng Zi and said, Brat, you dare to look down on old man? Let the old man give you a try. As soon as he finished speaking, he pulled out an arrow from the ground and swiftly knocked it on the composite bow. Gritting his teeth, he pulled the bowstring to a full moon and suddenly released it. The arrow shot out like a whirlwind and pierced into the target in the blink of an eye. Zhang Feng was stunned. The scene just now played in his mind like a movie. He had always thought that old Chen was just bragging. He didn't expect this guy to be so powerful. One of them hit the target. He was even F** King impartial. This was slightly inconceivable. His eyes were wide as he looked in disbelief at Cheng Yaojin. Old Chen, how did you do it? This is all a small matter. Cheng Yaojin raised his head so that other people could see the hair on his nose. He put on an appearance that he thought was handsome and said, which one of us Guanzhong men doesn't know a bit of riding and shooting? Just 1 li is child's play. Even if our Iron Bull came, there would be no problem. Zhang Feng twisted his lips and was slightly speechless. He had originally wanted to praise this guy and learn from him. Who would have thought that this guy would be so arrogant? Which Guanzhong man didn't know how to ride and shoot? He spoke as though the people of Guanzhong were invincible on horseback. However, these words did not seem to be without reason. The people of Guanzhong had been brave and skilled in battle since ancient times. In the past, when recruiting soldiers, they had to prioritize Guanzhong. The Qin and the Sui were basically like this. Looking at it this way, old Chen seemed to be right. Just as he was thinking, there was another wave of whooshing sounds. Zhang Feng turned his head abruptly, because he knew this was the sound of arrows. He saw 2 arrows explode in the air as Zhang Sunchong and Du Go let go of their hands, nailing straight to the target. 10th ring? 10th ring? He found it hard to believe. It was one thing for old Qing to be strong, but what were Zhong and Debing? How could they hit? Were all of Guanzhong really master archers? Or were these people all hiding their abilities? The clown was himself? He stared with wide eyes at Zhang Sunchong and the others. He asked with a face full of suspicion, Zhong, Debing, you two are so strong? Did you take medicine? Speak honestly? He really didn't dare to believe that this former wastrel could hit the target and was so skilled with the bow. Zhang Sunchong naturally did not know what Zhang Feng was thinking. He thought that this guy worshipped him. Therefore, he put on a pose that he thought was very handsome and took out the aura of a young master. Feng Zi, you don't know? Even though I am called a wastrel, but I cannot lose this most basic skill. In the past, my father often taught me riding and shooting, saying that riding and shooting is a basic skill. Originally, I did not want to learn, but seeing other people learn, I also learned. I said too much, this is a small matter, Feng Zi, do not mind. Chapter 1983. These words sounded modest, but in fact, they were full of showing off and ridicule. How could Zhang Feng not hear it? At this time, his face was already red, but there was nothing he could do. They had been practicing since childhood. As for him, there was no way he could compare. But this couldn't go on. Sooner or later he would be laughed to death by these guys. He had to do something to make himself a godly archer. Didn't archery rely on the eyes? Lao Tzu's eyes weren't as good as yours. Could it be that Lao Tzu couldn't make some support? Got it, binoculars? They could shoot now, but it wouldn't work when they were far away. Moreover, there were binoculars now. If Lao Tzu made binoculars, It would be Lao Tzu mocking them. As he was thinking, there was a burst of hurried footsteps not far away. He looked in the direction of the voice and saw Old Li leading Old Master Li and the others over. He hurriedly went up to greet them. Old Li, Old Master Li, why are you here? To see you. Li Yuan took the lead to speak. Since the last time in Chang'an, he hadn't seen Feng Zi. This time, when he heard Erlang say that Feng Zi was coming, he was happy and followed. As soon as he arrived, he looked up and down at Zhang Feng and said with a smile, I haven't seen you for a few days. You've become a lot darker. This was true. Last time on the hot air balloon, Zhang Feng was basked in the sun every day. He was indeed a bit darker. Zhang Feng also knew, so he didn't care. He said with a smile, a little, but I've become stronger. The two looked at each other and smiled like good friends who hadn't seen each other for a long time. But at this time, Li Shimin spoke. He looked at Zhang Feng and said with a smile, Feng Zi, I heard you made some divine bow? Is it true? Zhang Feng's mouth twitched. He was a bit confused. How did this news come so fast? The bow and arrow had just been made. How did this Lao Li know? It wasn't that he was trying to isolate Old Li, but the speed of the news was a little strange. As he was thinking, he glanced at Li Shimin, intentionally or unintentionally, trying to figure out something. But at that moment he saw a familiar face. It was Cheng Chumo, and the latter's gaze was somewhat evasive. Something was obviously going on. In an instant he understood something. So the reason Old Chen sent Tainyo out was to send a message. Motherf ***, if he wanted Lao Li and the others, he could have just said so. Why did they have to be so sneaky? He wasn't a petty person. If it weren't for Lao Li and the others, Gouda would have taught Tainyo a lesson. After thinking about it, he put on a smile and said, Lao Li, do you want to give it a try? Looks like it's true. Li Shimin's interest was piqued. He was an emperor on horseback and loved bows and weapons. Just now, when he heard Cheng Chumo praise the divine bow, he was still suspicious. Now, after hearing what Feng Zi said, there was indeed no problem. He quickly said, Go, 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 let's go see your divine bow. After saying that, he quickly walked towards Qing Yaojin and the others. Li Yuan and the others naturally followed. Zhang Feng did not move. He smiled and looked around at everyone, as if he was looking for something. Finally, his pupils shrank as if he had discovered a hunter's prey. He shouted, Wait. Cheng Chumo quivered. He knew that Feng Zi was calling him. Just now, he was preparing to sneak away under this guy's nose, but he didn't know that this guy's eyes were so good that he saw him at a glance. Now that it was not easy to leave, he could only turn his head with a helpless expression and laugh. Feng Zi, shut up. Zhang Feng interrupted him and said somewhat angrily, How can you be so heartless? Even if you want to find Lao Li and the others, you can just tell Lao Tzu. Why do you have to be so sneaky? Do you think Lao Tzu doesn't exist? Cheng Chumo originally wanted to quibble, but seeing that even Feng Zi had seen through him, he had no choice but to give up the excuse he had prepared. With a helpless expression, he said, I didn't want to go. My father forced me, Old Chen? Zhang Feng frowned and turned his head to glance at Old Chen, who was talking to Lao Li. He seemed to understand something. Could it be that this guy called Lao Li because he failed to bargain with him just now? That should be the case. Otherwise, there was no other reason. Did he want to rely on this to make him submit? Humph. Thinking about this, he walked towards Qing Yaojin and the others and said with a fake smile, What do you guys think of this bow? Li Shimin raised the bow in his hand and said with a satisfied expression, Not bad, not bad, it is indeed a divine bow. But your target is too close. Go, 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 put it further away. Zhang Feng didn't know how to respond to this. He originally thought that Old Chen's bow was very powerful. It was indeed powerful to be able to hit the target within a mile. But then he thought that Lao Li was even more powerful. He had to put the target further away. One had to know that 1 li was 500 meters. These guys actually said it so easily. Wasn't this a slap to his face? How could this be? Thinking about this, he waved his hand and said to Algernon, Add another mile. Chapter 1984. Jean Jinan might have noticed the director's dissatisfaction, so he sneakily moved a few more steps. The distance between them was more than 2 li. Zhang Feng laughed in his heart. Let's see how you're going to show off now. His face was calm as he said, it's fine now. Start showing off your archery. Li Shimin was overjoyed. He had always liked this kind of exciting activity. Even if Jin Jinan increased the distance by 3 li, it would not be a problem. Now it was only 1 li. What was the big deal? It was child's play. As he thought, he knocked the arrow. As he loosened his grip, the sound of the arrow piercing through the air reverberated in his ears. Another arrow hit. Zhang Feng's confidence was completely shattered. Mother **Ker, Lao Li was so powerful. He could hit the target 2 li? And he was not biased? Just as he was doubting himself, another whooshing sound was heard. Cheng Yaojin also hit the target as did Li Yuan, but he missed by a bit. This time, Zhang Feng was in a bad mood. So they were all experts, and he was the only clown? He was a bit annoyed. Why didn't he learn equestrian archery? Otherwise, he would not have lost so much face today. Only when he saw Zhang Sun and Du Go both miss the target did he feel a bit better. He seemed to have found some balance. He looked at Zhang Sun and Du Go and comforted them, don't worry you two. Take it slow. Na Cheng thought. Zhang Sun's words completely shattered his worldview. My hand just shook a bit. It's only 2 li. It's not like I can't hit the target. After saying this, he looked at Du Go and said with a determined face, come, let's continue. Du Go also seemed to have a telepathic connection. He knocked an arrow and shot it at the target. This time, the two were much better than before. Although they did not hit the target completely, they did not miss the target. They hit the 5th ring. Originally, this was not a big deal in their hearts, but it was a complete blow to Zhang Feng. He had thought that the two of them were like him, dabblers or something like that. Na Cheng did not expect that they could actually hit the target. This was a bit hard to understand. Just as he was doubting himself, he heard Li Shimin's voice. Feng Zi, why don't you come and try? Here, take the bow. Zhang Feng was stunned. He thought of an excuse and was about to reply when Zhang Sun rushed out from the side. He waved the bow in his hand and said with a smile, Feng Zi can't do it. He can't hit the target. You mother **Ker can't do it. Your whole family can't do it. You can't hit it. Your whole family can't hit it. Zhang Feng glared at Zhang Sun, his face flushed red. He wanted to slap this talkative guy to death. He was already angry and had nowhere to vent it. Who would have thought that this dog would be so mean? Say that I'm not good enough? Can't hit the target? He was simply courting death. Looking at Zhang Feng's furious appearance, Zhang Sun was a bit confused. He was just telling the truth. He did not know how he had offended this guy. He was even scolded to his face. Who the hell could he find to reason with? In fact, he was also a bit angry. If it were not for His Majesty here, he might have already gone up. It was just inconvenient now. Thus, he could only suppress his anger and ask, Are you crazy? Why are you scolding me? I'm scolding you. Zhang Feng snorted coldly. He did not care about Zhang Sun's reaction. He turned to look at Li Shimin and said proudly, Isn't it just shooting? I can hit 100% of the time. This is a piece of cake. 100% of the time? Li Shimin frowned. He did not believe it. He was the emperor of horses and could be said to be very proficient in equestrian archery. Even at his peak, he did not dare to say that he could hit 100% of the time. This kid said that he could hit 100% of the time? How was that possible? He was simply bragging. He was not the only one who did not believe it. Cheng Yaojin also looked at Zhang Feng with a face full of doubt. He had fought for half of his life and had never seen anyone who could hit 100% of the time. Even ruthless people like Qin Qiong and Li Jing did not dare to say that they could hit 100% of the time. Now, this kid actually said that he could hit 100% of the time? It was simply a joke. He questioned impolitely, Kid, stop bragging. If you have the ability, shoot a few arrows and see. If you can really hit 100% of the time, Lao Tzu will kowtow to you 3 times. The best way to test a person's archery skills was undoubtedly to shoot arrows. He did not believe that Zhang Feng could hit 100% of the time. That was why he dared to say so. However, what he did not expect was that Zhang Feng seemed to be confident. he smiled slightly. Old Chen, this is what you said. When the time comes, don't go back on your words. As he spoke, he looked at Li Yuan and said with a smile, I'll have to trouble old Master Li to testify for me. If I can hit 100% of the time, old Chen will have to fulfill his promise. Li Yuan was in a difficult position. He did not know if Feng Zi could hit 100% of the time, nor did he know why Qing Yaojin wanted to make a bet. He wanted to let these two leave it at that. However, when he saw Qing Yaojin smile, it seemed that victory was in his grasp. It was not good to dissuade him. Besides, he also wanted to see if Feng Zi was really so powerful. Thus, he said with a serious face, Okay, old man will testify for you. As soon as his voice fell, Qing Yaojin could not wait any longer. He urged, Hey, since there are no more questions, let's start shooting. Chapter 1985. Don't worry. Zhang Feng waved his hand, glanced at everyone, and said with a smile, I do have a way, but not now. I'm going to make something. After I'm done, I guarantee that it'll hit 100% of the time. If you're interested, you can come and take a look. Li Shimin was a little confused. What kind of thing could hit 100% of the time? Wasn't this a joke? However, Feng Zi never seemed to joke about such things. Just as he was about to ask, he saw that Zhang Feng had already walked towards the cave entrance. He hurriedly said, Feng Zi, wait for me. Laoli, wait. Cheng Yaojin stopped Li Shimin and asked a little worriedly, Do you think what Feng Zi said is true? He was angry just now, so he made a bet with Feng Zi. Now that he saw that Feng Zi didn't seem to be lying, he was a little flustered. What if he lost? Was he really going to kowtow? Then where would old Cheng's family put their face? Li Shimin also saw Cheng Yaojin's worry, but he couldn't do anything. The bet had already been made. Could it be that he had to withdraw it? Therefore, he could only comfort him, Old Cheng, since you've already made a bet, why don't you go and see what kind of tricks Feng Zi is playing? I can't do anything if you look for me. After saying that, he ignored Qing Yaojin and walked side by side with Li Yuan into the cave. At this time, Cheng Chimo walked over. He looked at Qing Yaojin with a serious face. Dad, don't worry. Feng Zi is just bragging. How can he hit 100% of the time? Even Uncle Qin can't do it. That kid? With his son's comfort, Qing Yaojin gradually relaxed. However, his heart was still beating. He felt that something was wrong, so he stared at Cheng Chimo and said with a serious face, Kid, if Lao Tzu loses later, you will complete the bet. After saying that, he turned and left, leaving the petrified Cheng Chimo standing in place. He didn't expect that comforting his father would end up harming him instead. This is kowtowing. You're not afraid of losing face, but I am. She really knew how to trick her son. Just as he was about to open his mouth to say something, he realized that his damned father had already disappeared. However, at this moment, Zhang Sun and Du Go walked over with malicious smiles on their faces. Hee, Iron Bull, don't worry. If Feng Zi can't do it, we'll make him kowtow to you. But if you succeed, you'll have to kowtow to him, huh? After ridiculing Cheng Chimo for a while, the two of them left with their arms around each other's shoulders, not giving him the slightest chance to talk back. Cheng Chimo wanted to curse, but he didn't know who to curse. He felt that he had been tricked by his father. He couldn't possibly curse his father, right? Therefore, he could only walk into the cave with a face full of resentment. He secretly cursed Zhang Feng in his heart to alleviate the resentment in his heart. Inside the cave, Zhang Feng looked at Arjunan and said seriously, Heat up the resin and melt it. Then make 2 molds. It should be something like this. As he spoke, he pulled out a pen and paper from the side. As he drew, he said, It should be something like this. Then, find some rubber to hold the resin in place. By the time he finished, the drawing was already done. Arjunan took the drawing and asked curiously, Dean, what is this called? What is it used for? This is called a telescope. Zhang Feng pointed at the drawing and said word by word, This is the thing I said would help me hit the target. As soon as he finished speaking, Qing Yaojin rushed out. He snatched the drawing from Arjunan's hands and looked at it seriously. However, no matter how he looked at it, he felt that something was wrong. He flipped the drawing over but still couldn't figure out what it was. He could only look at Zhang Feng and ask, Feng Zi, what is this thing? Is it as magical as you said? It is just that magical. Zhang Feng snatched the drawing and handed it to Arjun. He gestured for him to leave. Then, he looked at Qing Yaojin angrily and said, "What? Are you scared now? If you are, you can kowtow in advance." Scared? Qing Yaojin's eyes widened. His head was about to hit the sky. He had never known what fear was in his entire life. He played with crickets when he was 3 years old. He brought his dog up the mountain when he was 4 years old. He peeked at widows bathing when he was 5 years old. Now, he was saying that he was scared? It was ridiculous. However, looking at Feng Zi's posture just now, it really seemed like it was some kind of treasure. This made him a little uneasy. If he were to fail miserably, it would be embarrassing. That was why he jumped out of the boat. However, he wanted him to say that he was scared? That was impossible. Therefore, he looked at Zhang Feng arrogantly and said, "It is impossible to make Lao Tzu admit defeat unless you really do it." After that, he casually found a stool and sat down as if this matter had nothing to do with him. In fact, he was already doubting the authenticity of Feng Zi's thing. If it was real, then Lao Tzu's Qing family would lose a lot of face. As he thought about it, he kicked Cheng Chumo's leg. The latter stumbled. He grabbed his ear and whispered, "Go and find out what Feng Zi said." Chapter 1986. Cheng Chumo looked at Qing Yaojin with an aggrieved face. He had been beaten badly by his father, and now he was being abused. He felt terrible, but he did not dare to refute. After all, it was related to the face of the Qing family. He could only nod with tears in his eyes and turned around to ask Feng Zi's opinion. Unfortunately, things did not go as he wished. Zhang Feng was talking with Li Shimin, Li Yuan, and others at this time, so he had to stand aside and act as a servant. "Feng Zi, I didn't have a good time when I went to your place last time. When do you want to drink again?" Li Shimin looked at Zhang Feng with a smile. Last time at the academy, they were in the mood for drinking, and Yushernan and other old men rushed in, which made him feel uncomfortable. In the end, the party ended on a bad note, so until now, he was still thinking about how to drink again. Zhang Feng naturally knew what Li Shimin was thinking. After all, the last thing was related to him. His teacher did it for his own good, so he could not say it. Now that Lao Li asked, he could only respond awkwardly, "You can drink whenever you want. I have a lot of good wine." Before Li Shimin could answer, Li Yuan said excitedly, "It's better to do it today than to choose a day. How about today?" He usually stayed in the palace, and his favorite thing was good wine and delicious food. Since he tasted Feng Zi's wine, he felt that the wine in the palace was just so. Now when he heard that he wanted to drink, he was naturally happy. Unexpectedly, his enthusiasm was immediately extinguished. Zhang Feng said with embarrassment, "There is wine, but now we are doing something important. The telescope will be made later. It's not good to leave now. Besides, my teacher is still in the academy." "It makes sense." Li Shimin nodded in agreement. He was not afraid of Yushernan and the others, but he felt that the telescope mentioned by Feng Zi was more important. Although it had not been made yet, he would rather believe that it was real because as long as it was real, this thing could be used in the army. In this way, the national power of the Tang dynasty would be more prosperous. Wasn't this more important than drinking wine? Although Li Yuan wanted to drink wine in his heart, once he heard the two people both verbally refuse, it was not good for him to say anything. He could only spread out his hands, "You guys do as you please." At this moment, Alkinen walked over with some molds. "Dean, the materials are ready. What should we do now?" Zhang Feng took the rubber and resin and looked at them. After confirming that there were no problems, he looked at Arkanon and said seriously, "Next, we need to polish the lens. The lens is still ordinary resin. As long as it is polished accurately, it will be effective." After that, he got up and walked to the side of the furnace. He raised the resin lens and roasted it next to the fire. While roasting it, he said to Arkanon, "Roast the oil on the surface first, so that the smoothness and transparency can be guaranteed." Arkanon nodded as if he understood. In fact, he did not understand these things at all. He just felt that whatever the dean did was right, and he wanted to follow the dean and learn some wisdom. That was all. After about a quarter of an hour, Zhang Feng took off the resin lens and looked at it in front of his eyes. A smile appeared on his face. Seeing the dean smile, Arcanon was also happy. He hurriedly asked, "Dean, is it effective?" Zhang Feng handed the lens to Arcanon and said with a smile, "Look at it in front of your eyes." Arcanon took the lens doubtfully and looked at it in front of his eyes. He felt that the things around him were a little bigger than usual, which shocked him. He began to wonder if there was something wrong with his eyes. But when he thought about it, there was nothing wrong with his eyes. Was it because of the lens? With doubts in his mind, he put the lens in front of his eyes again. Sure enough, everything around him was the same as before. Even the dean's head was much bigger. He took off the lens in surprise and said with a trembling voice, "Dean, what is this?" He knew that this must be the dean's masterpiece. Otherwise, no one could create such a miracle. The crowd didn't know what the two were talking about, but they were attracted by Alkinon's puzzled expression. Coupled with the lens in his hand, the crowd couldn't figure out what was going on. They all looked at Zhang Feng, hoping that he would be able to figure out something. However, Zhang Feng just smiled faintly, as if it had nothing to do with him. "Don't look at me like that, everyone. This is just a processing. It will be better in the future. Arcanon, go and get some fine brushes. Prepare to polish it." Arcanon nodded and handed the lens in his hand to Zhang Feng. Then he turned and left. Everyone was confused. They gathered around Zhang Feng and looked at the lens. They all wanted to know what was going on. Li Shimin was the first to speak. "Fengzi, what happened just now? What's so good about this thing?" "Yes, tell us." Cheng Yaojin echoed. He had a vague feeling that something was wrong when he saw Arcanon's expression. Now he wanted to ask for more details. See for yourself if you want to know. Chapter 1987. Zhang Feng handed the lens to Li Shimin and smiled. "Put it on your eyes and you'll understand." Li Shimin took the lens with a puzzled expression. He wanted to ask something, but when he saw Feng Zi's confident expression, he held back and put the lens on his eyes. At this moment, he felt that the people around him seemed to have grown a lot bigger. Cheng Yaojin seemed to have grown 2 heads, and Feng Zi became fatter. What was going on? He suddenly took off the lens and asked subconsciously, "Feng Zi, what's going on?" Zhang Feng smiled and said proudly, "This is the power of the lens. I've only used a little now. You'll know in the future." "Used a little?" Li Shimin was startled. If he could magnify the things around him now, wouldn't it be even more powerful in the future? Could he see more than 10 miles away? Or more than 100 miles away? He was the emperor. His thoughts were jumpy and he thought more than others. Now, it was just a model, but he thought of the possibilities in the future. Cheng Yaojin was different. He looked at Li Shimin and Zhang Feng and felt that something was wrong. There were not many things that could make the emperor so serious. Now, looking at the emperor, it was obvious that this thing was very powerful. The bet? He didn't dare to think about it anymore. He quickly said to Li Shimin, "Let me see the lens." If it were someone else, he might have already snatched it. But this was the emperor. Even if they were outside the palace, he still didn't dare to go too far. Li Shimin was pulled back to reality by Cheng Yaojin's imagination. He didn't say anything and handed the lens over. Cheng Yaojin couldn't wait to take the lens and put it on his eyes. With one glance, he instantly regretted it. He saw that everything around him had become bigger. Even the things that were usually small had become clearer. There was nothing to be afraid of, but what was scary was that Feng Zi had just said that this was only the first step. Thinking about it, just the first step could achieve such an effect. If the rest of the steps were completed, wouldn't he lose without a doubt? If that was the case, wouldn't this be a sure bet? When he thought of this, he felt bitter in his heart. Lao Tzu was a duke. How could he kowtow and admit defeat because of a bet? If he really couldn't do it, he would have to wait for Iron Bull to do it. In any case, he had already agreed. Thinking of this, he looked at Zhang Feng and said in a fawning tone, "Fengzi, when will this thing of yours be done?" "What happened?" Zhang Feng looked at Cheng Yaojin in confusion. Just asking. Cheng Yaojin chuckled, trying to cover up the awkwardness in his words. Zhang Feng could tell that this guy was trying to get information out of him, but he didn't expose him. He smiled and said, "I'm not sure yet, but it should be soon, right?" Cheng Yaojin smiled awkwardly, turned around and fled. At this moment, he wished he could crawl into a mouse hole so that Feng Zi would not be able to find him, lest he mention the bed again. Feng Zi, let me see that thing of yours. Li Yuan walked up. He was usually bored deep in the palace. Now that Feng Zi had made such a novel thing, he couldn't hold it in anymore. Just now, he wanted to see this thing, but Erlang gave it to Qing Yaojin, which made him unhappy. Now that Qing Yaojin had left, he came up. For you. Zhang Feng handed the lens to Li Yuan and said with a smile, just put it on your eyes and you can see it. Li Yuan took the lens with a smile. He first played with it in his hand, then put it on his eyes with satisfaction. But at this moment he was stunned, because he realized that he could see things clearly, and he could see very clearly. What was going on? It turned out that his eyesight was not very good, and he could see things a little blurry. If he was far away, he couldn't see things clearly at all. Now that he put this lens on, he could actually see things clearly? How could this not make him excited? The muscles on his face trembled a little. He took off the lens and looked at Zhang Feng with an excited face. Feng Zi, this thing of yours is really so amazing. Quickly make more for me. Zhang Feng looked at Li Yuan with a puzzled face. Old master, what's wrong with you? Aya, it's a little hard to explain to you. Li Yuan's face was red. He didn't know how to explain to Zhang Feng. After thinking for a while, he said, let me tell you this, I used to see things a little blurry. If it was far away, I couldn't see clearly, but when I put on this lens of yours, it suddenly became better. Presbyopia? Zhang Feng frowned. This was his first reaction. Seeing things blurry and not being able to see clearly at a distance, wasn't this presbyopia? This presbyopia already existed in the Tang dynasty? He looked at Li Yuan with a curious face. Old Master Li, other than these, do you usually have any other symptoms? Li Yuan frowned as if he was thinking about what this was. After a while, he said, usually my eyes are a little sore, swollen, and sometimes I will cry for no reason. Zhang Feng was even more certain about this. This was King presbyopia. No wonder this old Master Li would be different from others when he wore the lens. Chapter 1988. Just as he was thinking, Li Shimin's voice rang out. Feng Zi, since you know about my father's eye problem, then quickly help him. In fact, he knew about Li Yuan's problems, but the imperial physicians in the palace were useless. They had treated him countless times, but there was no effect. Now that Feng Zi's lens actually had an effect, he definitely needed the other party's help. Zhang Feng could understand what Li Shimin and his son were saying, so he was naturally happy to help. After all, this resin was not worth much. It was just that the experiment had not been completed yet, so he said, Lao Li, old Master Li, there is no problem with what you said. It's just presbyopia. However, the lens experiment has not been completed yet. After the experiment is successful, I will make a pair of glasses for old Master Li, and it will be completely solved. Presbyopia? Glasses? Li Yuan and Li Shimin looked at each other, a little confused, and asked, what are these things? Zhang Feng forgot a problem. These words were too old, these guys did not understand, so he casually explained, and the two suddenly understood. But at this time, Alkinen came back with the brush. Zhang Feng did not talk much with the others. After all, making a telescope was important, so he casually sat on the stool and began to polish it. Cheng Yaojin asked for a rebuff, and it was not good to be thick-skinned and look, so he called Cheng Chumo to inquire. At first, Cheng Chumo refused, but when he saw that Feng Zi's thing was quite novel, he went over without waiting for his father's outburst. Li Shimin and Li Yuan, the father and son pair, did not need to be said. They had been in the palace all year round, and now that they saw such a powerful thing, they naturally did not want to let it go. Moreover, this thing was related to Li Yuan's eyes, so the two gathered in front of Zhang Feng like curious babies. After about the time it takes to burn a stick of incense, Zhang Feng stopped what he was doing and stretched. It's finally done. Cheng Chumo couldn't wait to ask, Feng Zi, how is it? He was now looking forward to the result, because he already knew that his damned old man wanted to use him to fulfill the bet. If Feng Zi really succeeded, then he would have to kowtow to Feng Zi. This was something he didn't want to see the most. Therefore, he didn't want Feng Zi to succeed. Zhang Feng didn't know about this. He just thought that this guy was curious, so he said angrily, "What's the hurry? I haven't read it yet, have I?" As he spoke, he picked up the lens and placed it in front of his eyes. The corner of his mouth unconsciously raised into a smile. Obviously, the effect this time was better than before. Not only could he see things clearly, but he could also magnify things that were far away. Zhang Feng's smile quickly attracted Li Shimin's attention. He asked curiously, "Feng Zi, how was it this time? Come give it a try." Zhang Feng smiled and handed the lens to Li Shimin. Li Shimin couldn't wait to take it. When he put it in front of his eyes and looked at it, he instantly felt uncomfortable. The effect was not just a little bit different from before. It was like the difference between heaven and earth. Now, not only could he see things clearly, but he could also magnify things that were far away. He put down the lens and looked at Zhang Feng in surprise. "Feng Zi, how did you do this?" Zhang Feng raised his head and said proudly, "This is just a small trick. The lens hasn't been completed yet. It still needs to be polished. When the two lenses are put together, you will know the effect." Hearing Feng Zi's words, Cheng Chumo couldn't help but be curious. He quickly said, "Can you show it to me?" Hearing this, Li Shimin handed the lens to Cheng Chumo. Cheng Chumo took it and put it in front of his eyes. He knew that something was wrong because he saw a very clear image. Didn't this mean that he had to kowtow? Thinking of this, his face became bitter. He couldn't help but blame his father for tricking his son. He was also angry that Feng Zi had made such a magical thing. However, he couldn't do anything about it. He could only give the lens back to Zhang Feng and smile bitterly. Zhang Feng seemed to have noticed Cheng Chumo's abnormality. However, he didn't pity this guy, who asked old Shin to make a bet. It was too late for him to realize his mistake now. He handed the lens back to Arcanon and said seriously, "Continue to polish it according to my method. Then, make 5 more identical lenses. Give them to me when you are done." Arcanon nodded, took the lens, and left. He had seen the dean's process and had roughly memorized it. It wouldn't be a problem for him to make some. Zhang Feng naturally believed in Arcanon. After telling him everything, he sat back on the stool, as if none of this had anything to do with him. However, everyone's curiosity had been completely aroused. How could they be dismissed by these 2 sentences? Li Shimin came up to Zhang Feng and said with a smile, "Feng Zi, if you succeed, how far can you see?" He had just seen that he could clearly see small things within 5 meters. If he could see further, he might be able to use it in industry or military, which would be beneficial to the Tang dynasty. Zhang Feng seemed to have seen through Li Shimin's thoughts. He said with a smile, "Lao Li, are you thinking of something?" Chapter 1989. What kind of thoughts could I have? Li Shimin denied it. The item had not been made yet, and its effects were still unknown. Naturally, he could not say what he was thinking. Thus, he said, "I'm just curious." "Oh." Zhang Feng nodded as if he understood. He smiled and said, "I don't know how far it can see, but it should be about 2 miles. 2 miles? These 2 words were like a stone thrown into a calm lake, immediately setting off waves of ripples. 2 miles? You're not bragging, are you? What kind of thing can see so far? Everyone exclaimed. Among them, Cheng Yaojin's voice was the loudest. He could not believe it. To be precise, he could not believe it. How could a few pieces of resin be able to see things 2 miles away? If this was not bragging, then what was it? Although he had used the lens to look, he had only seen the things in the cave. How big was the cave? It was only 1 mile in radius. What Feng Zi said was 2 miles. This was 1 kilometer. Using just a little bit of resin? This inevitably made him suspicious. Feng Zi, you can't speak without thinking. Otherwise, the bet just now will be doubled. This bet had always bothered him. He had been thinking about how to get rid of it. Now that Feng Zi had thrown out such a heavy bomb, he did not want to get rid of it anymore. Because this was simply impossible to achieve. In his knowledge, even the best soldiers could only barely shoot 2 miles. In other words, they could only see 2 miles. He did not believe that Feng Zi, who had never joined the army, could shoot 2 miles with the help of some bullsh*t resin. This was simply nonsense. Apart from this bet, he actually had a glimmer of hope that Feng Zi could make this thing. It was not that he wanted to kowtow, but because he had another identity, and that was a soldier. He had to think for the soldiers. If Feng Zi's thing was really powerful, then he could get it into the military hospital. In the future, he would not have to worry about not being able to see the enemy's situation clearly. However, when he thought of the bet, he was in a dilemma. On one hand, he hoped that it was true, but on the other hand, he hoped that it was false. He didn't want to lose the bet, and even wanted to raise the stakes and take all the treasures in Feng Zi's cave. Li Shimin, on the other hand, did not think so much. He really hoped that this thing was real because as long as it was real, it could be fully applied to industry and military. In this way, the strength of the Tang dynasty would be further improved, and his father's eyes could be cured. So he asked with a hopeful face, "Feng Zi, are you kidding me? Is it true?" Zhang Feng frowned and said with some dissatisfaction, "Do I look like I'm joking with you? Didn't you use it just now? Why don't you believe me?" Li Shimin saw that Zhang Feng was a little dissatisfied and nodded with a smile. "That's not it. It's just a little hard to believe." It was not that he didn't believe Zhang Feng, but that he couldn't believe it. Just now was just a moment ago. How big was this cave? Its radius was less than 1 mile, and it couldn't be compared with 2 miles at all. But when he thought about it, Feng Zi had made so many magical things before, such as hot air balloons and so on. This time, it didn't seem to be a big deal to make a telescope, so he added, "Feng Zi, can you make more of this thing? I want to try it too." As soon as he said that, everyone looked at Zhang Feng. Some of them had never used lenses before, but they had already heard so much about it. Now, if Feng Zi could make more of it, they might all have a chance. How could they not be excited? Zhang Feng glanced at the crowd and couldn't help laughing. "What do you think this thing is? Do you think it's easy to do it? First, you need to collect the resin, then you need to polish it and do repeated experiments. This is just the first one. We can talk about it after the experiment is completed." Everyone felt that their enthusiasm had been dispelled, but they didn't feel like giving up because they knew that Feng Zi could definitely do it. After about a quarter of an hour, Alkinen came back with several lenses. "Director, the lenses are all polished according to the method you just said. I also brought the rubber mold. What do we do now?" Zhang Feng took the lenses and put 2 pieces together in front of his eyes. When he looked at it, the distant objects were clearly displayed in front of his eyes, and they were magnified a lot. When he looked in other directions, the effect was exactly the same, and it was more than twice as good as before. He put down the lenses with satisfaction and was about to give them to Li Yuan to try, but he saw that Li Yuan's eyes were already wearing the lenses. He smiled. "Old Master Li, how is the effect?" Li Yuan turned his head and held the lenses with both hands. He looked very funny. He smiled and said, "Feng Zi, this thing of yours is really good. Is there any way to fix it? It's not the same if you keep holding it like this." Zhang Feng smiled and reached out to take off Li Yuan's lenses. "Old Master Li, you'll be tired if you keep holding your hands like this. I'll find a way for you. Give me the lenses first." Li Yuan handed the lenses to Zhang Feng skeptically. Zhang Feng took the lenses and turned to Alkinen. He said, "Go find some steel wires to make a bracket that can cover the lenses. The most important thing is to hang it on the ear." As he spoke, he kept gesturing to Alkinen with his hands. Alkinen quickly memorized it and left with the lenses. Chapter 1990. After instructing everyone, Zhang Feng picked up the lens and the rubber mold and prepared to install it. He had ordered Arcanon to make the mold, and it fit perfectly with the lens. Once it was put in, it could be used. However, no one had ever seen such a thing before, so they were curious. They all gathered around and asked at once, "Feng Zi, is this the telescope you were talking about? Why does it look so weird? Is he deliberately mystifying us?" Obviously, the last sentence was said by Cheng Yaojin. In his heart, he was worried that Feng Zi would succeed, but he was also worried that Feng Zi would fail. Under these 2 complicated emotions, he was very conflicted. He even regretted the bet just now. However, the bet had already been made. How could he, a dignified duke, admit his mistake? That was simply impossible. That was why they mocked him in such an eccentric manner. Zhang Feng was not a fool. Naturally, he could tell. He ignored this guy and explained to the others, "This is called a telescope. The rubber is just a mold. The lens is the most important part. As long as the lens is installed, it is basically a success." As he spoke, his hands had already started to press the lens into the rubber mold. As he was pressing, he seemed to have thought of something. The corner of his mouth curled up. "I suddenly remembered something. Who made a bet with me just now, saying that he would kowtow to me?" As soon as he said that, everyone instantly understood. Wasn't he talking about Qing Yaojin? Just now, this guy had made a bet with Feng Zi. If Feng Zi could make something that could shoot a willow leaf from 100 paces away, he would kowtow 3 times. Was he going to settle the score now? Thinking of this, they all looked at Qing Yaojin. Facing the sudden stare, Qing Yaojin felt a little uncomfortable and shivered. He was already feeling guilty, and being stared at like this, he felt even more guilty. However, he had been on the battlefield before, and at this time, he couldn't help but calm down. He deliberately coughed lightly to hide his nervousness. Then he said, "Isn't it just the bet just now? You haven't made it yet, right? Wait until you can shoot a willow leaf from 100 paces away." After that, he snorted and crossed his arms in front of his chest, putting on an arrogant look, as if he was not afraid of Zhang Feng's binoculars at all. In fact, his heart was beating like a drum, and he was secretly praying that it would not succeed. Zhang Feng saw through Qing Yaojin's pretense, but he didn't expose him. He just smiled and said, "Wait a minute. I hope someone doesn't go back on his word." "Feng Zi, don't worry." Li Yuan patted his chest and said with a straight face, "If this old man dares to be shameless, old man will break his legs. Don't forget that I am the guarantor." Qing Yaojin's heart skipped a beat as he cursed inwardly. Originally, he thought that if he really lost, he would just have to give Feng Zi something as compensation. But now that the emperor had spoken, there was no way he could get away with it. If there was no other way, he could only let Tai Niu go. This brat had a good relationship with Feng Zi, so he should be able to resolve this. Zhang Feng did not know about the schemes in Qing Yaojin's heart. He thanked Li Yuan and continued to install the binoculars. Everyone's gaze once again gathered on him. After about a quarter of an hour, the binoculars were finally completed. Zhang Feng let out a long breath, picked up the binoculars and tested it in front of his eyes. Sure enough, the effect was much better than before. Not only was it clear, it could also be magnified. The most important thing was that it did not shake. Just now, when he held the 2 lenses in front of his eyes, his hand would always unconsciously shake. Everyone looked at Zhang Feng's strange actions and did not find it strange. After all, they had all seen Feng Zi put the lenses into the mold with their own eyes. However, they were all curious. Just how powerful was this binoculars? Thus, Li Shimin asked, "Feng Zi, what's the difference between this time and before?" Zhang Feng was too lazy to answer because he knew that no matter how he described it, it would not be clear. It was better to see it with his own eyes. Therefore, he handed the binoculars to Li Shimin and motioned for him to see for himself. Li Shimin was naturally happy. He took the binoculars and kept exploring. However, just looking at it, it was as if he had opened up a new world. His vision was very clear. It was as if the things in the distance were pulled in front of him. It was completely different from the previous 2 times. If the things in the previous 2 times were magnified by 5 times, then this time it was magnified by 10 times. There was no way to compare. Li Yuan was attracted by Li Shimin's appearance. He quickly reached out and grabbed the binoculars. He also began to imagine in his own world. He had a bit of presbyopia and saw things a bit blurry. However, when he used this binoculars, he instantly felt that his eyes seemed to be better than when he was young. The metal slag in the cave, the rat feces, all of them were clearly seen. Looking at Li Yuan's appearance, Qing Yaojin's heart thumped. Just now, he had already tried Feng Zi's lenses and knew the effect. Now, looking at the emperor's appearance again, could it be that the effect was even better than before? He did not dare to think about it anymore. He quickly stepped forward and said, "Old master, can you let me see?" Chapter 1991. Li Yuan frowned. He took down the binoculars and glanced at Qing Yaojin. Originally, he was still looking at the scenery inside the cave. Who would have thought that this guy would come and ruin things? He originally wanted to scold him, but then he remembered that this guy still had a bet with Feng Zi. If he let this guy look with the binoculars, it might dispel his confidence. Thinking of this, he handed the binoculars to Cheng Yaojin. Cheng Yaojin couldn't wait to take it. He put it on his eyes and looked. Instantly, his whole person became unwell. This, mother-f***er, did it really become powerful? Not only could he see clearly in the distance, but it was also a bit blurry. If he took it out of the cave, how far could he see? He didn't dare to imagine because there was still a bet on him. Cheng Chumo saw that his father was stunned in place and knew that there was a problem with the binoculars. He hurriedly went forward and snatched it. He didn't care about his father's reaction, but when he put it on his eyes and looked, he quivered. This was simply a divine tool. No matter how far he could still see clearly. Then wouldn't he lose for sure? Would he have to kowtow to Feng Zi? He didn't dare to think about it. Before, he thought that his father would lose, but he didn't expect Feng Zi to be so powerful. Zhang Sunchong didn't know that Cheng Chumo had so many thoughts. He went forward and took the binoculars and go to study. The two of them were very curious just now, but the things had always been in the hands of Feng Zi and His Majesty. They couldn't get them. Now that they were in Cheng Chumo's hands, they naturally had to take a look. The two of them scrambled, and the binoculars finally fell into Zhang Sunchong's hands. When he put it on his eyes, he was dumbfounded, because he had never seen such a magical thing. Normally, his family was prominent, so he had seen everything. He had even been in a hot air balloon, so there was nothing to be surprised about. But this was different. When he put it on his eyes, he felt like he had an extra pair of eyes. His vision instantly improved, and now he felt that he could be compared with an eagle in the sky. He felt that he could now see the eagle. After that, Go also tried the binoculars. His reaction was basically the same as Zhang Sunchong's. He was shocked. How could there be such a thing? It was simply heaven-defying, because in his knowledge, resin was a kind of liquid secreted by trees. It could actually be made into such a thing. How could the eyes see things in the distance? Was this really inconceivable? Zhang Feng smiled in the face of everyone's incredulous expression. He knew that the telescope's function had not been fully utilized yet. If they went out, they would be able to see even further. Thus, he took the telescope, glanced at everyone, and said seriously, "Now, let's go out and try. Let's see if we can hit the target 100% of the time." As he spoke, he glanced at Cheng Yaojin. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that these words were said for Cheng Yaojin to hear. He also understood in his heart, but he did not dare to say more, afraid that he would accidentally say the wrong thing. At that moment, Alkinen walked over with a pair of golden spectacles in his hand. "Dean, the spectacles are ready. I even sewed them with gold thread." Zhang Feng was just about to take the glasses and examine them, but he saw Li Yuan's fiery gaze. He waved his hand, "Give the glasses to old Master Li. Is it okay to confirm that there are no problems?" Algernon nodded to indicate that there was no problem. He then handed the glasses to Li Yuan. Li Yuan took the glasses and looked at them. He looked at the exquisite frame and could not put them down. He was a little confused. "Feng Zi, how do I wear this?" "It's like this." Zhang Feng took the glasses and put them on his face. He demonstrated to Li Yuan and then handed them back. Li Yuan instantly understood and could not wait to put them on. However, the moment he put them on, he felt that his whole person was much more energetic. Not only could he see things clearly, but there seemed to be a temperament added to his body, which made him stretch his waist involuntarily. He glanced at everyone in the cave and felt that his whole eyes were much clearer. However, what puzzled him was that the glasses seemed to be a little yellow. He did not like this color, so he said to Zhang Feng, "Feng Zi, these glasses are a little yellow. Can you change the color?" This, Zhang Feng's mouth twitched. He was a little embarrassed. The resin itself was yellow. It was good enough that it could be made into glasses. How could he be picky? But what old Master Li said was not unreasonable. Yellow did not look good. How could he change the color? As he was thinking, he inadvertently saw the ink on the table. Suddenly, he had an idea and said with a smile, "Old Master Li, I have an idea. Give me the glasses." Li Yuan originally thought that there was no way to let it go. When he heard this, he immediately took off the glasses and handed them to Zhang Feng. Zhang Feng took the glasses and used his right hand to pick up the ink pen and smear it on the glasses. In a moment, the dark yellow lenses turned black. Zhang Feng handed the glasses to Li Yuan. Li Yuan did not reach out to take them. Instead, he was a little confused. Why were the glasses full of ink? How could he take them? And what he could not figure out the most was, why did Fengzi smear ink on the glasses? Was this not nonsense? How did a good pair of glasses turn into a pair of black and dirty things? Chapter 1992. He looked at Zhang Feng with a puzzled face and asked, "Fengzi, what are you doing? Why did you smear ink on the glasses?" Zhang Feng chuckled and handed the glasses to Li Yuan. "You'll know once you try it." Li Yuan took the glasses with a curious face and played with them in his hand for a moment. Other than finding that the lenses were blackened by ink, he didn't find anything special. He wanted to ask Fengzi again, but when he saw Fengzi's confident expression, he couldn't open his mouth. Driven by curiosity, he still put on the glasses. The moment he put on the glasses, he instantly felt that everything around him had changed. It was as if everything had turned black, as if a mysterious veil had been draped over him. This feeling was very wonderful, making his eyes light up. Not only that, wearing the glasses also gave him a feeling of looking down on the world, as if everything around him had to submit. This was an indescribable feeling. He reluctantly took off the glasses and looked at Zhang Feng with a surprised face. "Fengzi, how did you do it? If he could make a few more of such a magical thing, it would be a blessing." Zhang Feng smiled. "I just used ink to dye the color, nothing else." The others were a little confused. They didn't know the effect of the glasses, nor did they know the strange conversation between the two, but they were sure of one thing, and that was that the glasses were very powerful, at least not inferior to the binoculars. Their hearts were burning with passion, and they all wanted to try the effect of the glasses, but the glasses were in Li Yuan's hands, and they didn't dare to touch it. The group of people came out of the cave. Li Shimin and the others had already lined up, holding bows and arrows in their hands, eager to try. Cheng Yaojin stared at Zhang Feng, asking Zhang Feng to complete the bet just now. Zhang Feng was naturally not afraid. He had made the binoculars, so why would he be afraid of this? He held the bow and arrow in his hand, and under Cheng Yaojin's eyes almost popped out. He didn't believe that Zhang Feng could shoot arrows. Looking at this guy's small body, plus this distance, how was it possible? But this scene still slapped his face, and he instantly felt his face turn red. Just as he was looking for a chance to slip away, Zhang Feng said, "Old Cheng, did you forget the bet just now?" Cheng Yaojin's body shook. He was preparing to slip away because of the bet just now. How could he expect this kid to stop him at this time? Wasn't this deliberately making things difficult for him? But thinking about the bet just now, he became discouraged. After all, he was the one who wanted to make the bet. But he couldn't kowtow, right? Thinking about it, he shifted his gaze to Cheng Chumo. Cheng Chumo actually already knew what this damn father was thinking, but when he was looked at like this, he still felt a chill down his spine. He wanted to refuse, but when he thought of his father's inhumane means, he endured it and could only obediently kowtow to Zhang Feng. Zhang Feng naturally didn't want to. Old Cheng was the one who made the bet, so why did he ask his son to do it? Cheng Yaojin saw that Zhang Feng didn't want to, and instantly became anxious. As a duke, even if he lost the bet, he couldn't kowtow. It was understandable for his son to do it, but now Fengzi didn't want to? What should he do? Just as he was anxious, he inadvertently saw Li Shimin, who was shooting arrows. He had an idea and hurriedly asked Li Shimin to intercede on Zhang Feng's behalf. Li Shimin naturally knew all of this. At the same time, he also understood Old Cheng's difficulties, so he asked Zhang Feng to intercede. Zhang Feng wasn't an unreasonable person. When he saw that Lao Li had come to intercede, not only did he not need to kowtow, but he also didn't care about the previous matter with Old Cheng. However, he still needed to send the beef glue, fish glue, and other things up the mountain. Cheng Yaojin didn't agree at first. How could there be such things as beef glue at home? Besides, he was almost discovered by the tigress when he stole things last time. How could he dare to go again? However, when he thought about it, if this guy mentioned the bet again, he still agreed. After a while, Zhang Feng was in a good mood. His archery skills had also greatly improved. He called everyone to continue practicing. Li Shimin was needless to say. He had been a master archer since he was young. Naturally, his arrows didn't miss. Cheng Yaojin wasn't bad either. He could get the 10th ring every time. However, Zhang Sun, Chong, and Du Go couldn't do it. Once the distance was far, they couldn't even shoot a single arrow. Especially Cheng Chumo, he couldn't even shoot a single arrow. This made Cheng Yaojin very angry. He went up and gave him a violent beating. It felt like he wanted to vent all his anger on this guy. He beat Cheng Chumo until he was a little doubtful about life. Li Yuan originally wanted to practice archery, but once the distance was far, he was a little weak. In addition, he had just gotten the glasses, so his mind was not on the bow at all. Therefore, he wore the glasses and showed off everywhere. No one dared to say anything, so they could only agree. While showing off, he actually walked down the forging workshop and unknowingly walked to the academy. Just as he was about to go to the academy to look for Yu Shernan and the others to show off, a white-bearded old man walked towards him. Who else could it be but Sun Simiao? Li Yuan quickly stepped forward and deliberately pushed up his glasses. He said with a proud face, "Old Sun, where are you going?" Chapter 1993. Old Sun? Sun Simiao frowned, obviously a little unhappy. Because in the entire Tang dynasty, there were not many people who dared to talk to him like this, except for the emperor. The emperor? This voice sounded a bit like him. He raised his head and glanced. It felt a bit different. This person was wearing a strange thing on his eyes, which had already covered half of his face. However, this expression was very similar. He asked uncertainly, "Are you Old Master Li?" Outside, he called the emperor like this. First, it was to ensure safety, and second, it was to deceive people. Li Yuan took off his glasses and smiled. If it's not me, who else can it be? Only then did Sun Simiao see clearly. It was really the emperor, but why was the emperor wearing a strange thing? He asked puzzledly, "Old Master Li, what are you wearing?" Hearing Sun Simiao's question, Li Yuan instantly felt that he was a bit more pretentious. He raised his eyebrows and raised the glasses in his hand. "This is a good thing. Wearing it can cure my blurry eyes." "Wait," Sun Simiao immediately interrupted. He looked at Li Yuan solemnly and said word by word, "What did you say just now? What can it cure?" He was the chief imperial doctor of the palace. Li Yuan's presbyopia was treated by him. He didn't know how many medicines he had taken, but there was no effect at all. Now, he actually said that such an unknown thing could cure presbyopia. Wasn't this slapping his own imperial doctor's face? The most important thing was that he had studied medical books for many years and knew that there was no way to cure presbyopia. Now that the emperor was holding this thing, he was undoubtedly deceived. He absolutely couldn't tolerate this kind of thing. Moreover, he himself had presbyopia. He hadn't cured it for so many years. Could such a thing have an effect? He could basically be sure now that the emperor was deceived. Li Yuan didn't know that Sun Simiao had calculated him in just a few seconds. He still said with a proud face, "This thing is called glasses. It's made by Feng Zi." "Feng Zi?" Sun Simiao almost exclaimed. He had always regarded Feng Zi as a nephew of the student generation. He didn't expect this guy to deceive the emperor. He was angry. Feng Zi, this guy actually came out to deceive people. Doesn't he know that presbyopia can't be cured? The more he said, the angrier he became. He waved his sleeve and turned to leave. Li Yuan was a little confused. He had come to share with you out of goodwill. Why did he suddenly have to leave? And he even scolded Feng Zi? He hurriedly stepped forward and blocked Sun Simiao. "Old Sun, what are you doing?" Sun Simiao waved his sleeves and said angrily, "Find Yu Shernan. Let him see that his disciple actually came out to deceive people." As he spoke, he actually wanted to leave again. Fortunately, Li Yuan's eyes were sharp and his hands were fast. He grabbed Sun Simiao and hurriedly said, "Feng Zi didn't lie to me. These eyes really have an effect. It can treat blurry eyes." After he finished speaking, he handed the glasses to Sun Simiao, wanting this guy to try it. However, Sun Simiao did not take over. Instead, he frowned as he vaguely felt that something was wrong. Because he knew that the emperor didn't need to lie to him, and he wouldn't lie to him. Moreover, he looked so serious that it didn't seem like he was faking it. Now that he thought about it, it might be true. After all, Feng Zi had once done so many inconceivable things. Thinking about it, he half believed and half doubtfully took the glasses and looked at Li Yuan. How do I use this? Li Yuan made a hand gesture and said with a smile, just wear it on your eyes like this. Sun Simiao frowned. Even though he still had some doubts in his heart, his hands were no longer listening to his orders. He put it on his eyes as if he was possessed by gods and demons. However, at this moment, he felt that his eyes seemed to have cleared up quite a bit. It was as if he could see things more clearly. He suddenly turned his head and looked into the distance. He actually discovered that the places that he couldn't see clearly before were now so clear. How was this possible? His heart shook. He pulled off the glasses and carefully observed them in his hand, hoping to find a clue. Yet at this moment, Li Yuan opened his mouth and looked at Sun Simiao with a mocking expression. How is it? Do you believe me now? Sun Simiao didn't answer. He only nodded his head heavily. At this moment, he was already immersed in the magic of the glasses. How could he have the leisure to answer Li Yuan's boring question? After looking for a while, he suddenly raised his head. As if he remembered something important, he hurriedly said, You said that this thing was made by Feng Zi? That's right. Li Yuan nodded and said with a smile, Feng Zi made it just now. It seems to have used some resin. Where is Feng Zi? Without waiting for Li Yuan to finish speaking, Sun Simiao anxiously interrupted. This thing had a very good effect on dazzling eyes. It could be said to be a miracle in the history of medicine. Now that he knew that it was made by Feng Zi, how could he let it go? Moreover, he had already used it himself. If he made more, wouldn't the old man with dazzling eyes in the Tang dynasty be saved? Li Yuan didn't know about this. He casually replied, Feng Zi is in the forging workshop. What's wrong? Forging workshop? Sun Simiao murmured and turned to walk towards the forging workshop. Chapter 1994. What are you going to do? Li Yuan was puzzled and asked behind him. Feng Zi's glasses have a miraculous effect. I want to ask him how he made it. Sun Simiao turned his head and said as he walked. He just wanted to see Feng Zi as soon as possible. Other things had nothing to do with him. Hearing this, Li Yuan also roughly understood the importance of this matter. He put on his glasses and followed without saying a word. At the same time, on Chang'an Street, a carriage galloped on the street. The coachman waved the long whip in his hand as if he didn't feel sorry for the galloping horse at all. Every whip hit the horse's body. The horse kept neighing, but it didn't dare to stop. The surrounding vendors were overturned by the horse's hooves, raising a burst of dust, causing the surrounding people to stop and curse. Motherf asterisk cur, do you know how to ride a horse? Are you in a hurry to be reincarnated? What the hell? This is Chang'an Street. How can these crazy people come in? Everyone stop. Looking at the carriage, it doesn't look like it's from the capital. It's a bit like Chang'an. Maybe it's an official's family. We can't afford to offend them. Let's pack up. What do you mean we can't afford to offend them? This is the Motherf asterisk cur's foot. It's the place where the law is enforced. The crowd clamored for a while, but they couldn't do anything because they could see that the person on the carriage was not an ordinary person. What the person said just now was a bit reasonable. The carriage was printed with Jiangnan patterns. It was even more not something that ordinary people like them could afford to offend. The sound of complaints and curses gradually passed. They each cleaned up their vendors. But at this moment, a crisp sound came. Dang, dang, dang. They were all businessmen and had a keen sense of smell. Naturally, they could detect what it was. They immediately exclaimed, Copper coins, copper coins. As soon as the exclamation sounded, the people who were cleaning up the vendors looked sideways. They saw hundreds of copper coins being thrown at them. It was none other than the carriage just now. Seeing this, the crowd stopped cursing and picked up the copper coins. What's more, they kept praising the person on the carriage. This was not because they were greedy for wealth, but because the copper wires that were thrown by the carriage were something they couldn't earn in a day. Although the carriage knocked over their vendors, it also left money so that their day's hard work would not be in vain. Of course, the people in the carriage didn't know about this. At this moment, the carriage had already rushed to another street and turned in another direction. Its speed was so fast that it made people speechless. Fortunately, there were not many pedestrians on this street. Otherwise, copper coins might be scattered everywhere. Huff! The coachman reined in the horse and stopped in front of a manor. He raised his head and glanced at the signboard. There were two big words written on it: Zhang Manor. "We're here." The coachman glanced at the carriage and said in a deep voice. There was no reply from within the carriage, only a series of coughs. A moment later, a middle-aged man, supported by another man, poked his head out. He took a deep look at the plaque, but didn't say anything. He only covered his mouth and coughed heavily twice. If Zhang Feng was here, he would definitely recognize that this was the little brother he had sent to follow Huan Yan. He was supposed to protect you with Huan Yan in Jiangnan. But the situation in Jiangnan was too serious. It had completely exceeded Master's expectations. Many young masters of the clans had coveted you for a long time and frequently harassed her. Some were even ready to propose marriage. You was also a heroine. Not only did she not agree, but she also mediated among them. However, how could these clans give up so easily? One had to know that the Yu family had some power in Jiangnan. Although these young masters of the clans were after Yu's beauty, they wanted to rope her family in or even annex it. The current situation in Jiangnan and the Yu family's situation had reached a precarious point. As for himself, he had been beaten by the young masters of the clans because he helped Yu and had not recovered yet. Thinking of this, he was annoyed. Why couldn't he complete Master's task? Why did he have to come back to find Master? He punched the carriage and said coldly, "Let's go and see Master." With that, he lifted his trembling right leg and was about to get off the carriage. Fortunately, the man beside him quickly supported him. Otherwise, he might have fallen. As soon as they reached the gate of Zhang Mansion, the two servants raised their vigilance. They frowned, looked at each other, and said in unison, "Who is it?" Huan Yan glanced at the servant. He wasn't surprised that these two didn't recognize him because very few people knew when he left, so he didn't blame them. He said softly, "I'm also from the Zhang residence. I'm here to find Master." Zhang Mansion? The leader of the servants frowned slightly. In his memory, he had never seen this person. Or it could be said that there were too many people in Zhang Mansion and he had long forgotten. However, this person said that he was looking for Master. It seemed that he was very familiar with Zhang Mansion. He could let him in, but Master was not here now. He hesitated for a moment and said softly, "Master is not here. You can come again later. Then I'll have to trouble you to inform Du Ziding." Chapter 1995. Huan Yan still looked amiable. Zhang Mansion was his home, so these people were naturally his family. Naturally, they couldn't be compared with those guys in Jiangnan. Seeing that Huan Yan could call out the housekeeper's name, the servant hesitated. Because the housekeeper was famous in Chang'an, and everyone had heard of him, so it was not strange that he could say his name. However, it was rare to see someone as calm as him. Maybe he was a relative or a good friend of the housekeeper. After thinking for a while, the servant winked at another person, and that person ran out of Zhang Mansion. In less than a moment, Du Ziding strode out. Seeing that it was Huan Yan, his face changed and he hurried forward. "Why are you here?" He knew that Huan Yan was sent to Jiangnan by Master to protect you. He would never come back without orders. Why did he suddenly appear at the gate of Zhang Mansion? Did something happen? Huan Yan didn't answer. Instead, he took Du Ziding's hand and said solemnly, "Let's go inside and talk." Du Ziding frowned and faintly felt that something was wrong. However, he knew that there was no way to talk here, so he led Huan Yan to the hall. However, he soon found that Huan Yan seemed to have something wrong with his body. He kept coughing and asked several times, but Huan Yan didn't answer. In the hall, Du Ziding looked at Huan Yan with a serious face. "What's going on? Why did you come back from Jiangnan? And why do you keep coughing? Where's Master?" Huan Yan didn't answer directly, but asked Zhang Feng. In his opinion, Master must be informed of this matter first, and only Master could calm it down. Master is in Shao Mountain. Du Ziding was straightforward. He knew that Huan Yan must have something to tell Master. Shao Mountain? Huan Yan turned his head and glanced in the direction of Shao Mountain. Finally he looked at Du Ziding and said anxiously, "Send someone to Shao Mountain immediately and tell Master that something happened in Jiangnan. Ask him to go down the mountain immediately. There can be no delay." Du Ziding wanted to ask Huan Yan more, but seeing that he was so anxious, he didn't say anything and turned to walk out of the door. At the same time, in the forging workshop, Zhang Feng was currently communicating with Sun Simiao about the effects of the glasses. This old man originally didn't believe that there was such a magical thing, but now, when he looked at the binoculars, he was immediately shocked. "Feng Zi, can you get some for old man?" Sun Simiao said calmly. It was not that he wanted something new, but he found that this thing could treat blurry eyes. This was simply a miracle in the history of medicine. He wanted to bring it back for research and use it himself. "Elder son, what do you want this for?" Zhang Feng looked at Sun Simiao with a puzzled expression and asked curiously, "Could it be that you also have presbyopia?" Sun Simiao glanced at Zhang Feng and smiled awkwardly. "Old man, I don't know what you mean by presbyopia, but I do have it. Most importantly, this pair of glasses can treat presbyopia. I'm going to do some research on it, and it would be best if it could be promoted nationwide." This Fengzi. Li Yuan on the side interjected. "Since this pair of glasses can treat presbyopia, what's the harm in promoting it?" Zhang Feng nodded secretly. He had thought about promoting the glasses before, but he couldn't do a loss-making business, so he asked, "How much money can this make?" Sun Simiao frowned and was faintly displeased. Medicine is great and sacred. This guy actually measured it with money? He wanted to reprimand him, but when he thought that Feng Zi still had the technology, he suppressed the idea and had to agree. Old man doesn't know how much money it will make, but it should be no problem to benefit the world. So it is. Zhang Feng's eyes turned. In fact, he didn't have to make money. He just asked casually. After all, he already had a lot of money, but when he wanted to promote it, he couldn't help but feel pain. Then promote it. Okay. Sun Simiao nodded with satisfaction. Just now, he didn't find this kid pleasing to the eye, but when these words came out, he instantly felt that Feng Zi was not bad. He smiled. Feng Zi really has awareness. It was not in vain for Bashi to accept you as a disciple. Zhang Feng curled his lips. He didn't plan to pay, so why talk about this? He was just about to ask about the promotion when a shout came from outside the cave. "Dean, someone is looking for you." As soon as the voice fell, two men came in front of Zhang Feng. One was a worker in the cave, and the other was a servant of the Zhang mansion. Zhang Feng recognized the servant's identity at a glance and asked, "What are you looking for me for?" The servant glanced at the people around him, then strode forward and bent down beside Zhang Feng's ear. Zhang Feng didn't argue because he knew that since the servant was so cautious, there must be something important. "Master, something happened in Jiangnan." "What?" Zhang Feng stood up from the stool and stared at the servant with wide eyes. "What did you mean?" The servant was a little flustered. He glanced around and hurriedly went forward and whispered, "Someone just entered the Zhang mansion and said that something happened in Jiangnan. They asked Master to go back immediately." Huan Yan? Chapter 1996. Zhang Feng's pupils shrank. Speaking of Jiangnan, the first person he thought of was definitely Yu, but Yu couldn't have come here. The only possibility was Huan Yan, who was protecting Yu. This guy was ordered to protect Yu with Ya Daoren. It was impossible for him to leave. Unless something had happened. This was the only possibility. Thinking of this, he strode out of the cave. "Feng Zi, where are you going?" Sun Simiao stood up and shouted. They were just talking about something. If this kid left, who would he talk to? Zhang Feng was in a hurry. He didn't care about this. He left in a hurry. Find Algernon about the glasses. Seeing this, Li Yuan vaguely guessed something and followed him out of the cave. Outside the cave, Zhang Feng walked down the mountain in a hurry. He didn't even bother to pay attention to Li Shimin and the others, who were shooting arrows. Fortunately, the servants had prepared a carriage. Zhang Feng got in the carriage and rushed down the mountain. Unfortunately, it was not easy to ride a horse. Otherwise, he would have ridden down the mountain. After a while, Zhang Feng finally returned to the Zhang mansion. The servants who were carrying the palanquin were already sweating profusely from exhaustion. However, Zhang Feng was not in the mood to care about this. He strode into the mansion and shouted as soon as he entered, Old Du, where did you die?" If the person from Jiangnan was Huan Yan, it must be Du Ziding who received him, so this old guy must know. In the hall, Du Ziding heard the shout and rushed out in a hurry. "Master, master." Huan Yan was trembling because of his injury, but the moment he saw Zhang Feng, it was as if he had seen his backbone. His body stiffened and he hurriedly said, "Master, you're finally back." Zhang Feng strode forward and supported Huan Yan. He hurriedly said, "Why are you back? Did something happen in Jiangnan?" Cough, cough. Huan Yan looked at Zhang Feng excitedly and didn't even notice that he was coughing. "Master, cough, cough. Miss Yu was by many young masters in Jiangnan." Cough, cough. As he spoke, he coughed again, but this time, he coughed up blood. Zhang Feng held Huan Yan tightly and hurriedly asked, "What's wrong with you? Why is he coughing so badly?" Although he was worried about Yu, he was also worried about Huan Yan. Besides, Huan Yan came back from thousands of miles away to deliver the message. If anything happened to him, it would be terrible. Therefore, he had to be careful. However, Huan Yan didn't care as he stubbornly said, "Cough, cough. These are all minor injuries." Zhang Feng was no longer calm. Although Huan Yan said it was a minor injury, anyone with a discerning eye could see that it was a fatal injury. He turned to look at Du Ziding and hurriedly said, "Immediately find the best doctor in Chang." Du Ziding nodded. In fact, he had already gone to find the doctor, but he hadn't come yet. However, at this moment, a series of hurried footsteps could be heard. Prince Zhang, Zhang Yuyao and Jingshu ran over holding their skirts. They had just heard that Prince Zhang had returned to the mansion, so they rushed over in a hurry. However, when they came over, they saw Prince Zhang supporting a man, which made them puzzled. Just as they were about to ask, Zhang Feng said, "Why are you here?" Zhang Yuyao stepped forward and smiled. "We sisters are here to see young master." Zhang Feng nodded slightly and ignored the two girls. He supported Huan Yan and walked to the hall. Now, Huan Yan was the most important to him because he had important news. The two girls were a little puzzled. Prince Zhang wasn't usually like this. Although he didn't care about them, he would at least ask about their well-being. Why didn't he ask about them today? They looked at each other and felt that everything was related to the man, so they followed Zhang Feng into the hall. After entering the hall, Zhang Feng helped Huan Yan sit on a chair and hurriedly said, "What did you say about Yue?" "Yue?" The two girls' hearts skipped a beat and they looked at each other. Could it be that this man was here to send a message to Yue? Or did something happen to you over there? Something must have happened. Otherwise, how could he look so sick? They were very tactful. Even if they saw it, they didn't say much because they knew that in Prince Zhang's heart, Yu was as important as them. It was unwise to interrupt, so they chose to watch silently. At this time, Huan Yan coughed twice again with traces of blood at the corner of his mouth. He said with a pale face, "You know that many young masters of the clans in Jiangnan covet Miss Yu's beauty?" Zhang Feng slammed the table and stood up, shouting, "Sooner or later, I will make those guys pay the price." After that, he noticed the crowd and his expression eased a little. He looked at Huan Yan and said, "Go on, what's going on?" Huan Yan nodded and continued, "Those young masters of the clans not only coveted Miss Yu's beauty, but they also coveted the Yu family's wealth and status. Thus, they used all means to make Miss Yu submit, but Miss Yu refused to submit. Thus, these clans attacked the Yu family through business, wanting to disintegrate the Yu family. Even the injuries on my body." Chapter 1997. Hearing this, Zhang Feng had already understood the whole story. He clenched his right fist and the blue veins on his neck stood out. He couldn't help it anymore. "These bastards even dare to touch my woman. Old Du, gather people immediately and kill these sons of bitches." As he spoke, he turned around and was about to walk out of the door. But at this moment, Jingshu stepped forward and stopped Zhang Feng. "Young master, wait, what are you doing?" Zhang Feng looked at Jingshu angrily. Young master, don't be impulsive. Jingshu took Zhang Feng's hand and said with a pleading face, there are many people in Jiangnan. We shouldn't fight recklessly. She was very worried that Prince Zhang would be trapped by the clans on impulse. Although she had accepted Yu Yu, when she saw that the young master was going to risk his life for the latter and offend the clans, her heart throbbed a little. It was not that she didn't want to save Yu Yu, but if it cost so much, she would rather Prince Zhang not go. Of course, it was also because of the selfishness of a woman. Thinking that her man was going to risk his life for another woman, anyone would feel a little uncomfortable. Zhang Yuyao was no exception. She hoped that Zhang Feng would take the risk himself. Even if the other party was Yu Yu, he could send someone to save her. What if there was any danger? It was not easy for her to get to this point with Prince Zhang. Naturally, she didn't want Prince Zhang to be in any danger. Thinking of this, she hurriedly persuaded, Prince Zhang, Sister Jingshu is right. It's difficult to fight against them in Jiangnan now. Don't take the risk yourself. Zhang Feng naturally understood the reason. There were many clans in Jiangnan. If he went there, he would undoubtedly die. Even if he was a king or a minister, it was not enough. But who was he? He was Zhang Feng. His woman was being pursued by others. His woman was being hurt by others. How could he be indifferent? He glanced at the two women and said coldly, I must go to Jiangnan. After that, he walked to the door. The two girls panicked. They chased after him while urging him to stay. Du Ziding also felt the seriousness of the situation. He shouldn't have been involved in the master's family matters, but he also knew the horror of Jiangnan. It was a giant beast that ate people without spitting out the bones. With the master's current strength, he would definitely be eaten to the bone if he went to Jiangnan. Therefore, he resolutely stood in front of Zhang Feng and said, Master, it's very dangerous for you to go to Jiangnan now. Think about it, Jiangnan is not like Chang'an. You have no connections and no resources. How can you establish yourself there? In less than half a day, we will be eaten clean by the clan. What can we use to save Miss Yu? Zhang Feng was stunned. To be honest, these words moved him a little because old Du was right. Without his own power in Jiangnan, what could he do even if he went? However, this thought only lasted for a moment, and he quickly regained his senses. He stared at Du Ziding and said word by word, even if there isn't, I'm still going to save you. After that, he walked out of the door with the momentum of a warrior who would never return. Du Ziding looked at the master's back and felt a little strange for a moment. He originally wanted to stop the master, but he didn't expect to make a fool of himself. The master's determination seemed to be firmer. He didn't object to the master saving Miss Yu. Instead, he supported it a little. After all, Yu was good and beautiful. It was also good to be Zhang Feng's mistress. However, they were going to Jiangnan, where there were clans everywhere. The master was usually very smart. Why was he so stubborn this time? Thinking of this, he sighed secretly. He turned his head and saw Zhang Yuyao and Jingshu. At this time, the two girls were also filled with grief. They looked at Zhang Feng's back with tears in their almond-shaped eyes. Although they didn't consummate their marriage with Zhang Feng and didn't hold any ceremony, they had long regarded themselves as Zhang Feng's wife and concubine. Now, Prince Zhang was going to Jiangnan to save Yu Yu. They had already accepted Yu Yu in their hearts, but when they thought that Prince Zhang was going to take the risk for her, they felt sour in their hearts. Zhang Feng was completely unaware of this. He was only thinking about how to save Yu Yu. At this time, he had already stepped out of the door and was about to get on the high horse. Not far away, there was a sound of horse hooves. Two carriages sped over and stopped directly at the gate of the Zhang mansion. The curtain of the carriage in front was lifted, and three people quickly walked down. They were Li Yuan, Li Shimin, and Cheng Yaojin. Lao Li old Cheng, why are you here? Zhang Feng exclaimed. In his memory, these guys should still be in the forging workshop. Why did they suddenly come to the Zhang mansion? This made him a little confused. Li Shimin seemed to see Zhang Feng's confusion. He and Li Yuan looked at each other and deliberately changed the topic. Fengzi, where are you going in such a hurry? Zhang Feng then realized that he had important things to do. He didn't want to waste time with Li Shimin and hurriedly said, I have something to do in Jiangnan. With that, he turned and walked to the horse. Li Shimin frowned and said to himself, not good. When he was in the forging workshop just now, Li Yuan had already reminded him that Fengzi might go to Jiangnan. It seemed that he was right. Chapter 1998. He hurriedly stepped forward and grabbed Zhang Feng. Fengzi, Jiangnan is too dangerous now. Don't put yourself in danger. Lao Tzu's woman is in danger now, and you're telling me not to go? Zhang Feng glared at Li Shimin and shouted in dissatisfaction, if it were you, what would you do? Li Shimin choked and was a little speechless. He had never thought about this and would never think about it, so he didn't know how to answer. However, he still said earnestly, I don't know about this and I don't want to know. But I know that if you go to Jiangnan now, something will happen. Also, what about the workshop? What about the textile factory? What about your efforts? Zhang Feng narrowed his eyes. He was obviously a little moved. Just now, he only wanted to go to Jiangnan and didn't think about these things. Now that Li Shimin mentioned it, he was actually a little nervous. Yes, if he left, what would happen to the workshop? Although the composite bow had just been made, his glasses had fallen off again. And the research institute, the hot air balloon was now being manufactured. What if something happened? Could Ma Zhou, Hao Chujun, and the others hold on? And the manufacturing factory, Zhang Mansion, what would he do when the time came? He made a huge struggle in his heart. It was as if there were two souls, one telling him to go to the right and the other to the left. In the end, he made a decision and looked at Li Shimin resolutely. I can't take care of everything. You take care of these things. If it doesn't work, there are others. As he spoke, he was about to get on the horse. At this time, a familiar voice sounded. Wait, Zhang Feng frowned. He felt that this voice was a bit like his respected teacher's, but he also felt that something was off. His respected teacher couldn't possibly be here. Filled with doubt, he turned his head to look, and his body unconsciously froze. The people who came were his teachers and the old scholar. There were a total of 5 people. Zhang Feng frowned slightly. He faintly felt that something was wrong. He had just arrived at Zhang Mansion. Why did his teachers come so quickly? And Lao Li, Old Sheng, and the others? Wasn't this too strange? Could it be that someone had tipped them off? He swept his gaze over everyone with a puzzled expression, only to see Li Yuan's eyes somewhat evasive. He instantly understood the whole story. When the servant came to report, only Sun Simiao and Old Master Li were there. Sun Simiao had nothing to do with it, so it must be Old Master Li who told everyone. With this thought, he stepped forward and cupped his hands to Yu Shernan and the others. Respected teachers, I have an important matter to attend to in Jiangnan. No. Yu Shernan narrowed his eyes. He knew why Zhang Feng wanted to go to Jiangnan. It was not that he wanted to stop him on purpose. It was just that Zhang Feng was his most valued disciple. He had placed almost all his efforts on this kid. Now he said he wanted to go to Jiangnan? Don't they know how dangerous Jiangnan is? That place was full of clans that ate people without spitting out the bones. It was precisely because he was born in a clan that he understood the methods of the clans and the clans in Jiangnan better. In order to achieve their goals, they did not care about the methods. A person like Feng Zi would definitely suffer if he went to Jiangnan. He would not allow such a thing to happen. He stroked his white beard and said solemnly, Feng Zi, since ancient times, there have been many clans in Jiangnan. It is not as simple as you think. If they want to kill someone, they will not do it themselves. Instead, they will create public opinion and pressure. If you go there without any power, you will not be able to resist. Of course, he said these words only to calm Zhang Feng down. The power was not a big deal. The Yu family had a lot of power in Jiangnan. He just did not want Feng Zi to get involved in this mess. Zhang Feng could understand Yu Shernan's concern, but his heart had already flown to Jiangnan. It was useless to say more now. However, he could not ignore his teacher's words. He could only cup his hands and say, I understand what you are saying, but I must go to Jiangnan. There are people very important to me there. I hope you can understand. Have you forgotten about your academy? The old scholar opened his mouth. He stared at Zhang Feng with a serious face. The academy is your painstaking effort, and the year-end examination is about to begin. Are you going to leave just like that? Year-end examination? Zhang Feng was stunned. This was something he had prepared when he first set up the academy. Every year, the students had to take a year-end examination, and this examination was used to identify the students' grades. Now the academy was still using middle school textbooks. After the examination, they would need to use university textbooks. These were all his painstaking efforts. If he really left just like that, he would not be able to bear it. At this moment, he was a little hesitant. He did not need to care about the forging workshop, manufacturing factory, and research institute for the time being because there were people taking care of them. However, the academy was a little different. If he left just like that, what about the textbooks? So many years of hard work would be gone. Moreover, this was also irresponsible to the students. However, in Jiangnan, he was a little conflicted and did not know what to do. Li Shimin saw that Zhang Feng was in a deadlock and knew that the opportunity had come. He leaned over to Qing Yaojin and whispered in his ear, "Go and call Big Black here." Chapter 1999. Cheng Yaojin glanced at Zhang Feng, who was deep in thought, and instantly understood. Feng Zi wanted to go to Jiangnan because of Yu Qiyu, who was Yu Qigong's cousin. As long as Yu Qigong came to persuade him, it would be more effective than others. Thinking of this, he turned and slipped away. At this moment, Zhang Feng had come back to his senses. After thinking for a while, he still felt that it was more important to go to Jiangnan. The teaching materials could be delayed. If it really didn't work, he could write them in Jiangnan and send them over. If something happened to you in Jiangnan, it would be too late for regrets. Therefore, he cupped his hands and said to the old scholar, "Old scholar, I can understand what you said, but the matter in Jiangnan is imminent. I dare not delay, or I'm worried that you will be in danger." "You, Xue Ji frowned and said with some dissatisfaction, "Is Miss Yu more important than your career? You worked so hard to build the academy, and now it's on the right track. I believe the academy has a high place in your heart? Now you want to leave the academy? Are you worthy of the academy? Are you worthy of the students of the academy? Also, the academy's end-of-year examination is imminent. Are you going to abandon the academy?" Zhang Feng frowned and didn't know what to say, because these words made him feel a little ashamed. Indeed, he built the academy single-handedly, and it was like his child. It was not good to just leave like this, and even a little heartless. However, it wasn't that he wouldn't come back. The academy would still flourish in the future. It was just that this trip to Jiangnan was unpredictable, and it was hard to say what would happen in the future. However, he couldn't leave you alone. This made it difficult for him. But at this moment, there was the sound of horse hooves not far away. Zhang Feng was suddenly awakened. He looked in the direction of the sound and saw Yu Qigong and Cheng Yaojin. "Feng Zi," Yu Qigong shouted and jumped down before the horse stopped. He strode to Zhang Feng and said with a serious face, "Feng Zi, I heard that you're leaving?" Zhang Feng nodded and said with a serious expression, "Yu is in danger in Jiangnan. I'm going to save her." "Which bastard said that?" Yu Qigong shouted loudly. His anger made his face appear red and black. There was a faint killing intent. "Yu has not had a good time in Jiangnan, but it is definitely not as dangerous as you just said." On the way here, Old Cheng had told him that Feng Zi was going to Jiangnan, so he came this time to stop Zhang Feng from going to Jiangnan. Although Yu was in danger in Jiangnan, it was not to the point of imminent danger yet. Moreover, if Feng Zi went, it would obviously intensify the conflict between the clans, and Yu would be in even more danger. Zhang Feng knew that Yu Qigong was there to stop him, but he didn't know the situation in Jiangnan. Now that he heard about Yu's situation, he was a little anxious. He quickly asked, "What's going on? Is Yu in any danger?" Yu Qigong furrowed his brows slightly and glanced at Li Shimin. Only then did he say, is not in as much danger as you think in Jiangnan. She is originally from a clan. Even if other clans have thoughts about her, don't you still have me? How can I let her be bullied so easily?" Zhang Feng nodded. What old Yu said was very reasonable. Yu was his cousin. Even if she was in danger as her cousin, he could not ignore it. However, why would there be news from Jiangnan? He asked in confusion, but there is news from Jiangnan that you is now in a very dangerous situation and is about to be annexed by the clans. It's not that exaggerated. Yu Qigong flatly denied it. He looked deeply at Zhang Feng and said, the Yu family's business has suffered a bit of a blow, but I've already helped them. Now, the Yu family's situation has eased a bit, and Yu isn't in that much danger. Moreover, even if Yu was in danger as her older cousin, how could I ignore it? I also know about what happened to Jia Daoren. It was just an accident. Zhang Feng took a deep breath. He understood what Yu Qigong meant and believed his words, but he still felt a little uneasy. He could only ask, are you sure? Is Yu really not in danger? He wanted to go to Jiangnan, but he was somewhat moved by Lao Li's words just now. In addition, his teacher's reprimand made him waver even more. Yes, the academy, the research institute, and the workshop were all his hard work. He really did not want to leave. However, these were not as important as Yu. For a moment, he did not even want to care about anything. He just wanted to go to Jiangnan to see Yu. However, when he thought of those clans and the people behind them, he felt that things were not so simple. Indeed, Yu Qigong and Li Shimin also thought so. At the same time, they also knew that most of the clans in Jiangnan were people or branches of the people behind them. That was why they urged Zhang Feng to stay. Otherwise, with Zhang Feng's personality, he would definitely cause a bloody storm in Jiangnan. At that time, it would be out of their control. Chapter 2000. Therefore, Yu Qigong nodded and said, yes, is not in danger for the time being. If you really want to save you, you should pave the way first, so that you won't be in a hurry in the future. Pave the way? Zhang Feng frowned slightly and asked in confusion, what do you mean? Yu Qigong did not answer, but turned to give Li Shimin a look. The latter understood, stepped forward, and said earnestly, Fengzi, I don't need to say anything. I think you know who those people in Jiangnan are, right? Zhang Feng nodded and said, they are all people of the 5 surnames and 7 hopes. Li Shimin nodded slightly and said solemnly, you had a conflict with the 5 surnames and 7 hopes before, and your business threatened their family business, so they are always thinking about how to deal with you. Am I afraid of them? Zhang Feng frowned and was a little angry. Those bastards are already dissatisfied with me, and this time they are even worse. I can't let them go like this. Don't stop me. Fengzi, Li Shimin patted Zhang Feng on the shoulder and motioned for him to be quiet. Then he said earnestly, I know you are not afraid of them, but you forgot one thing. Since those clans in Jiangnan hate you to the core, why don't they come to Chang'an City to deal with you? It's because they can't enter Chang'an City. But once you go out, you will undoubtedly be a sheep in a tiger's mouth, and there will be no return. They want to lure you out of Chang. If you go out like this, won't you fall into their trap? Moreover, with your current power, even if you can gain a foothold in Jiangnan, have you ever thought that there are so many clans in Jiangnan? If they unite, will you be a match for them? At this point, he glanced at everyone and said indifferently, not to mention you, Fengzi, even if any of us present here, we don't have the confidence to deal with the Jiangnan clan. Their strength is beyond your imagination. When the time comes, can you still save your? It was true that what he said was a little exaggerated, but it was true. There were really a few clans here who could deal with the Jiangnan clans. Even Qing Yaojin and Yu Qigong, who had always been arrogant and domineering, lowered their proud heads because they knew that Li Shimin was right, especially Qing Yaojin. Although he looked rough, he knew it well. His wife was the Cui clan in Qinghe. Otherwise, why would he be so afraid of his wife? A dignified soldier was afraid of a woman. This would be a laughingstock if it was spread out, but it was not uncommon in Chang, and especially in the imperial court. It was not only Qing Yaojin, but also Zhang Sun Wuji, Du Ruhui, and others. They all married the daughters of the clans, and some of them had the Cui clan's daughters. These marriages could make their families more powerful and prosperous. This was one of the reasons why many people wanted to marry the daughters of the clans. Zhang Feng naturally knew about this trend, but the anger in his heart had already burned him. He did not care about what Li Shimin said. He shouted, Lao Li, I know what you said. Do you want me to leave you, or to die and not save her? He stared at Li Shimin with red eyes. At this moment, in his opinion, Lao Li was stopping him. Fengzi, don't be impulsive. Li Shimin put his hands on Zhang Feng's shoulders and comforted him. Didn't Lao Yu say it just now? You is not in danger. As he spoke, he gave Yu Qigong a look. The latter understood and quickly stepped forward. Yes, Fengzi, is not in danger now. Since you want to find her, you have to prepare. How are you going to face the Jiangnan clans? Otherwise it will be useless. Yu Shinan stepped forward and glanced at Yu Qigong with his slightly muddy eyes. Not only can Fengzi not go to Jiangnan, but he can't deal with the clans and the Chui clan. He originally wanted to stop Fengzi from going to Jiangnan, but the more he listened, the more he felt that something was wrong. These guys were actually encouraging Fengzi to deal with the clans. Did they not know how powerful the clans were? Wasn't this sending Fengzi to his death? Moreover, he, Chu Suiliang, and the others were also from the clans, but they belonged to some small clans. Even if they were small clans, they still had some nostalgia in their hearts. Now that they heard that Fengzi was going to deal with the clans, what they were most worried about was not implicating themselves, but Fengzi's safety. Yu Qigong was big and rough, so he naturally did not think of this. He looked at Yu Shinan and asked, Old Yu, what do you mean? Why can't we deal with them now? Yu Shinan glared at Yu Qigong, stroked his beard, and narrowed his eyes. The Jiangnan clans usually look like a plate of loose sand, but once they encounter an external enemy, they will immediately unite. Moreover, now that the Jiangnan clans have united, Fengzi is even more difficult to deal with, so we can't act rashly. What do you think, Master? Zhang Feng looked at Yu Shinan and asked anxiously. He was naturally not worried about Yu Shinan and the others stopping him, but he was worried about those clans. Chapter 2001. Yu Shinan glanced deeply at Zhang Feng. Right now, the Jiangnan clans are gathering together. Naturally, we can't deal with them all at once. We have to break them one by one. Zhang Feng nodded. In reality, he already had an idea in his heart. Now that he heard his teacher's opinion, he was even more certain. He swept his gaze over the crowd and said solemnly, Actually, there is a way. Speaking to this point, Li Shimin patted Zhang Feng's shoulder and interrupted, Come, let's talk inside. Only now did Zhang Feng realize that they had been standing at the door all this time. He swept his gaze over the crowd. Everyone, let's talk inside. This topic was too sensitive. He couldn't just stand at the door and talk with assurance. Otherwise, if someone with ulterior motives heard it, it might lead to a fatal disaster. Everyone also understood. They nodded and followed Zhang Feng's back as he walked through the door. In the hall, Zhang Feng ordered the servants to serve tea and then dismissed everyone at the door. Li Shimin gently sipped the tea and looked at Zhang Feng. Fengzi, to continue the topic just now, what plans do you have for the 5 surnames and 7 hopes? The 5 surnames and 7 hopes had always been a thorn in his heart and also a thorn in the Tang dynasty. They were powerful and deeply rooted. They were basically old monsters that had been passed down for hundreds or even thousands of years. Since ancient times, they had enjoyed lofty prestige and status. Furthermore, the 5 surnames and 7 hopes were connected by marriage. In order to make the clan even stronger, they did not allow the daughters of the clan to marry outside, much less marry into the imperial family. The Li imperial family scoffed at this point. However, in their hearts, they still hoped to marry a daughter of the 5 surnames and 7 hopes. After all, marrying a daughter of the 5 surnames and 7 hopes was equivalent to half a person of the 5 surnames and 7 hopes. They could also obtain a portion of their support. Not only the imperial family, but even the large clans of Guanzhong also had this thought. There were even noblemen who said, The only regret in my life is that I have not been able to marry a daughter of the 5 surnames. From these points, it could be seen how terrifying the 5 surnames and 7 hopes were. It was true that the Li surname of the imperial family was also a branch of the 5 surnames and 7 hopes. When Li Yuan raised his army, he received the support of the Li family of Longxi, the Li family of Zhao County, and the other 5 surnames and 7 hopes. However, since the founding of the country, the 5 surnames and 7 hopes had gradually become arrogant and despotic. This was also one of the reasons why Li Shimin wanted to suppress the 5 surnames and 7 hopes. Zhang Feng didn't know much about this, but he already had a plan in mind. He said, since we've decided to do it, we naturally have to uproot these guys. Hearing this, Li Shimin's interest was immediately piqued. He hurriedly asked, what do you mean? Zhang Feng glanced at the crowd and said with a gloomy face, those clans in Jiangnan are already deeply rooted. They have many henchmen and disciples in the imperial court. They also have a lot of prestige in the Tang dynasty and faintly threaten the status of the imperial family. However, there are also many hedonistic sons. This time, when we go to Jiangnan, the first thing we have to do is to kill those hedonistic sons. Speaking of this, a cold light flashed in his eyes. There was no other reason than these hedonistic sons coveting you. The reason why those hedonistic sons became hedonistic sons is that many of them have extraordinary positions in the clans. This time, I want to control them and then attack the clan's enterprises. As he spoke, he suddenly remembered something. His teachers and many of the people present were from the clans. It seemed that he didn't respect them too much by saying this, so he simply didn't speak. However, Li Shimin was anxious. He hurriedly urged, Fengzi, what are you talking about? Hurry up and say it. Zhang Feng glanced at the crowd and still didn't speak. The old scholar at the side had sharp eyes and saw the clues. He stroked his beard and said with a smile, Fengzi, just say it. It's okay. No one will blame you. He was alone and didn't belong to any clan. It was fine if he said it. Moreover, now Fengzi's attention was all on the 5 surnames and 7 hopes. He didn't have any plans to go to Jiangnan. This was a good thing. Of course, he had to be encouraged. Yu Shernan narrowed his eyes and seemed to have seen something. He smiled and said, that's right. Although there are many clans present, they are not people from the 5 surnames and 7 hopes. Fengzi, you can speak freely. Hearing these words, Fengzi's heart was finally at ease. He said faintly, actually, I have already thought about it before. The reason why the 5 surnames and 7 hopes can rise is because they have a large number of people and their unparalleled family business. Therefore, if we want to attack them, we must first start from these 2 aspects. That's right. Li Yuan at the side nodded. He was the one who knew the 5 surnames and 7 hopes the best because he was born in the Li family of Taiyuan, which was a very large branch of the Li family of Longxi. When he started the war, he received great support from the Longxi group. However, later, these guys gradually became blind and arrogant. They thought that without them, the Li family couldn't be the emperor at all. Therefore, they spread some rumors among the people and began to rope in other clans. However, when he had just become the emperor, the royal family had no way to fight against the 5 surnames and 7 hopes. Even now, Erlang could only suppress them, but not completely suppress them. Otherwise, it would be counterproductive. Thinking of this, he frowned and said, the whole Tang dynasty is full of people from the 5 surnames and 7 hopes. Not only the rural scholars, but also the inside and outside of the court can't be spared. However, they have a large number of people and can't be easily attacked. Chapter 2002. Everyone nodded in unison. They were in Guangzhou. Although they did not have much contact with the 5 surnames and 7 hopes, they could understand the terror of the 5 surnames and 7 hopes. No matter what happened in the world, these people could often predict the future and take people by surprise. Zhang Feng glanced at everyone, smiled, and shook his head. You can't be so absolute. Although the 5 surnames and 7 hopes have a large number of people, most of them are mediocre people. The real power is still in the hands of a few people. Think about it. If you can control their population, won't you be able to control the development of the 5 surnames and 7 hopes? Control the population? Li Shimin was slightly taken aback. In fact, he had thought of this method before. He had even discussed it with Zhangsun Wuji, Du Ruhui, Wei Jing and other officials, but the final result was not satisfactory. Because Wei Jing believed that even if the population was controlled, it was nothing more than restricting the marriage of the 5 surnames and 7 hopes. However, this would definitely cause the dissatisfaction of the 5 surnames and 7 hopes, and gradually cut off their connection with the court. This was not a good thing for the court. Zhangsun Wuji believed that this could be done. Although the 5 surnames and 7 hopes were powerful, they were still the people of the Tang dynasty. As long as an imperial edict was issued, even if they secretly disobeyed the imperial order, they had to obey on the surface. Because they were a clan, they would not lose the face of the entire clan because of a small matter. In this way, they would have to marry some women to weaken the power of the 5 surnames and 7 hopes. In the end, the two sides argued endlessly, and this proposal was not issued for a long time. But he did not expect Fengzi to mention this today. Did Fengzi think of this method long ago? He was somewhat puzzled and asked curiously, Fengzi, did you think of this method before? Before? Zhang Feng laughed embarrassedly. In fact, this method did exist in history. He just used it temporarily. However, he could not reveal it to Li Shimin at this time, so he said half-jokingly, more or less. I thought of it, but I just said it today. Have you thought about how to implement it? Li Shimin asked. This was a problem that the two officials of the imperial court had been debating for a long time. If they could find the best solution from Fengzi, he believed that the two old men, Zhang Sun Wuji and Wei Zheng, would have nothing to say. Zhang Feng narrowed his eyes as if he was thinking about something. No one made a sound for fear of disturbing Zhang Feng. Just like this, the hall was unusually quiet. After about a quarter of an hour, his eyes flashed and a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. I can ask His Majesty to issue an edict to restrict marriage. All men and women with different surnames are prohibited from marrying. Li Shimin looked at Zhang Feng disappointedly. He thought that it would be some great trick, but in the end, it was still the same. He had already discussed it with Wei Zheng and the others. He said with a bit of disappointment, Fengzi, I'm afraid this method won't work. Think about it. On the surface, the edict can restrict marriage, but secretly, no one knows whether they are people with different surnames or not. Moreover, if the people with different surnames and surnames are disgusted, what will happen if they suddenly leave the imperial court? You have to know that there are many people with different surnames and surnames in the imperial court. This is very unfavorable for the imperial court. These words were basically Wei Zheng's original words. He did not notify the edict. If it backfired, it would not benefit the imperial court at all. Of course, Li Shimin also knew the pros and cons, so he dared to say it to Zhang Feng. Zhang Feng naturally didn't know about this, but he smiled with a hint of contempt. Old Li, I don't know who told you this, or if it's your own opinion, but in my eyes, it's a big mistake. Oh, how do you know? Li Yuan opened his mouth. He had heard clearly just now and knew that Erlang and Fengzi were talking about different surnames and surnames, so he did not interrupt. However, when he heard Fengzi say that it was very wrong, he could not help but be surprised because he and Erlang stood on the same position. First, they had to think about the royal family and the people. From the words just now, Fengzi obviously had a different view. Indeed, Zhang Feng had a different view because he and Li Shimin had different positions, so their attitudes were different. Now that he saw Li Yuan ask, he could not help but ask, Old Master Li, may I ask, when should the women of the Tang dynasty get married? Li Yuan did not expect Fengzi to ask such a common question. He had doubts in his heart, but thinking that Fengzi might have some secrets, he still frowned and said, the smallest golden hairpin can't be older than the marriageable age, which is between 12 and 15 years old. This age is suitable. Zhang Feng asked again, what about the man? Li Yuan's frown deepened. A weak crown is the most suitable. Zhang Feng smiled. Then the 5 surnames and surnames and surnames must be the same? Li Yuan did not answer immediately, but pondered because he felt like he had discovered something, but he could not say it. Seeing that Fengzi was a little anxious, he said, the 5 surnames and surnames and surnames are a little different from ordinary people. The children of their clan are often betrothed when they are children. Before they are born, they have already been married. When they grow up, they will naturally be married, but... Chapter 2003. Speaking of this, he frowned as if he had thought of something, but these are the minority. Only some children with status in the clan will be betrothed. The others are arranged by the parents of both sides, and they are not allowed to interfere. Some of them don't even know what the bride looks like on the day of the wedding. This is also one of the reasons why there are so many people in the 5 surnames and 7 hopes. No one dares to object. Hearing this, Zhang Feng could not help but sigh. The Tang dynasty was already so open, but those clans still did this. However, although this method was not very clever, it was very beneficial to the development of the clan. At the same time, he was also glad that they were not arranged by others. After sighing with emotion, he coughed twice and said, "So that's the case. Then the marriage restriction order is much more convenient." "What do you mean?" Li Shimin frowned and quickly said, "The marriage restriction order is an imperial edict, and these clans have always intermarried. In this way, those clans will definitely be dissatisfied. Why do you say it's much more convenient?" Zhang Feng glanced at everyone and said with a smile, "Think about it. Which man doesn't want to have 3 wives and 4 concubines?" Hearing this, everyone could not help but blush. Zhang Feng was right, but it was still a bit indecent to say this in public, especially Chang'an and the others. It was a bit harsh to hear, so they hurriedly urged, "Hurry up and continue." Oh. Perhaps he felt his teacher's dissatisfaction. Zhang Feng repeatedly agreed and continued. For those big clans, as well as those arranged marriages between 5 families and 7 sons, even if it can make the clan powerful, the young people in the clan will definitely be dissatisfied. Needless to say, the men will want to marry all of them, but what about the women? If they marry a good husband, then it's fine, but if they marry a prodigal son, then wouldn't their lives be ruined? Therefore, I dare to say that these women will definitely have resentment in their hearts, but they usually don't dare to speak out and suppress it in their hearts. Over time, these women shouldn't be able to live for long, right? Li Shimin frowned as if he was thinking about something. Indeed, many women in the 5 surnames and 7 hopes died early, and many died as soon as they married into their husbands' families. But what does this have to do with the marriage restriction order? He asked in confusion. Fengzi, even if what you said just now makes sense, what does this marriage restriction order have to do with it? It seems that you still don't understand. Zhang Feng picked up the cold tea and took a sip. He smiled and said, "Think about it. If the marriage restriction order is announced, who will be the first to be happy?" "Who would be the first to be happy?" Li Shimin furrowed his brows, unable to wrap his head around it. If this marriage restriction was announced, it would definitely be boycotted. Who would be happy about it? Moreover, the people in power with different surnames would not allow it. Who would be happy? What was in Feng Zi's head? Just as he was ridiculing Zhang Feng, he suddenly recalled what Zhang Feng had said earlier. A woman with 5 surnames and 7 looks? Those women whose marriages were arranged? If the marriage restriction order was announced, those women should be happy. Feng Zi had just said that many of these women's marriages were unlucky, and some of them might be abused, especially those women from small clans. If they married into a big family like the 5 surnames and 7 hopes, it would be fine if they met a good husband, but if they met a bad one, they might regret it for the rest of their lives. Presumably, once the marriage restriction order was announced, they would have more freedom. They might even be able to freely choose a husband. For those women, it was undoubtedly a gamble. However, would they give up the conditions of marrying into a rich and powerful family? Li Shimin was puzzled. He looked at Zhang Feng and asked, "Fengzi, I roughly understand what you said, but why would those women listen?" "Whether they listen or not is a small matter." Zhang Feng waved his hand and did not care. He smiled and said, "The most important thing is the marriage restriction order." Li Shimin frowned and looked at Li Yuan. Then he turned to look at Zhang Feng. "What do you mean?" "Wait a minute." Zhang Feng waved his hand and interrupted Li Shimin. Then he took out a few cigarettes from his waist and scattered them on Li Shimin's table. Then he handed one to Li Yuan, Qing Yaojin, Yu Shinan and the others. Then he returned to his seat and took out a lighter to light the cigarette. He took a deep breath and looked at Li Shimin. He smiled awkwardly. "Sorry, I'm addicted to smoking. You can continue." Li Shimin did not blame Zhang Feng because his addiction to smoking also came. Seeing that Zhang Feng was smoking enthusiastically, he picked up the cigarette from the table and lit it. He took a deep breath and said slowly, "Just now I asked you why you said the most important thing is the marriage restriction order?" Zhang Feng took the cigarette butt and looked deeply at Li Shimin. He said, "The marriage restriction order is indeed only superficial. It may be able to deal with those small clans, but it's not enough to deal with the 5 families and 7 Wangs and the Guanlong clan. Because they have the strength to refute His Majesty and even dare to refute His Majesty. Hearing this, Li Shimin's eyes narrowed and a murderous aura flashed. Chapter 2004. Indeed, these guys were powerful. Sometimes, not only would they not listen to the imperial edict, they would even refute it. However, this was only a small minority. Even if it was a small minority, it still made him feel ashamed. Think about it, a behemoth comparable to the royal family was entrenched in the Tang dynasty. Any emperor would toss and turn restlessly, let alone him, Li Shimin. How could an emperor allow such a thing to happen? However, he really had no good ideas now. He could only talk with Feng Zi. At this time, Feng Zi spoke again. However, with the marriage restriction order, it is equivalent to having a shackle that can trap the 5 surnames and 7 hopes. Those with status will naturally not be moved, but those at the bottom will definitely not be able to hold it in, especially those women. Their lifelong dream is to marry a good husband. Once this marriage restriction order is issued, those women will definitely speak out, and those with status will suppress those women. As time goes by, the two will have conflicts. In this way, the marriage between the 5 surnames and 7 hopes will be eased, but what? Li Shimin hurriedly said. He just understood that this kid was stuck, which made him very unhappy. However, this method will take a long time to be effective. Zhang Feng smoked his cigarette and narrowed his eyes, and it also needs someone to cooperate. Li Shimin frowned. Who do you need to cooperate with? Zhang Feng glanced at everyone and said solemnly, if you want the cooperation of other clans, as long as it is a famous clan, it will be fine. When the women of the 5 surnames and 7 hopes reach the age of 12 to 14, let the young masters of the clans come to propose marriage. This, Li Shimin glanced at Li Yuan, then looked at Zhang Feng, revealing a difficult expression. I'm afraid this is a bit difficult. How can those young masters of the clans be so obedient? It's not difficult. Zhang Feng took a deep breath and said slowly, think about it, in that clan, the people are not proud of marrying women of the 5 surnames and 7 hopes. As long as you encourage them, those guys will definitely be more active than the other. Li Shimin nodded slightly. He knew that what Feng Zi said was right. Indeed, many clans were proud of marrying women of the 5 surnames and 7 hopes. There were even many court officials who wanted to go, including some relatives of the emperor. But even if you want to marry her, does she have to marry you? The people of the 5 surnames and 7 Wangs were all arrogant people. Even if there was a marriage restriction order, it might not be able to stop them from getting married. Li Shimin was very clear about this point. He said, what you said is not wrong, but how can a woman of unknown surnames marry? Even if they wanted to marry, would the elders in the clan agree? He originally thought that this would make Feng Zi give up on this idea, but unexpectedly he just smiled. I know all this, but think about it, what if the marriage restriction order is only half? Limit of half. Li Shimin was stunned. Could it be that Feng Zi meant to restrict half of the people with the 5 surnames and 7 hopes and leave the other half unrestricted? Would this be effective? He was a little puzzled and asked, you mean to restrict half of the people and leave the other half unrestricted? Zhang Feng nodded and exhaled a mouthful of smoke, then slowly said, the 5 surnames and 7 hopes are a total of 7 distinguished clans. As long as 4 of the 5 distinguished clans are restricted from marriage and the other 3 are not restricted, then the women of these 3 distinguished clans will be digested internally. Over time, the blood relationship will become closer and closer. Li Shimin frowned. He was a little puzzled. Wasn't it a good thing that the blood relationship was getting closer and closer? The bloodline in the clan would also become purer and purer. Why did it seem like it was a bad thing in Feng Zi's words? He interrupted in confusion. Feng Zi, isn't it a good thing that your blood relationship is getting closer and closer to the clan? Haven't they always hoped for this? Why do you look so happy? Everyone also nodded, because in their opinion, it was a good thing to marry close relatives, especially between cousins. This was simply a match made in heaven. In particular, some big clans, such as the 5 surnames and 7 hopes, thought that their bloodline was noble, so they constantly adopted the method of marrying close relatives to ensure the purity of their bloodline. Moreover, They believed that if they married other women, it would tarnish their bloodline, so they could only marry close relatives to avoid the confusion of their bloodline. In addition, men in the Tang dynasty generally had 3 wives and 4 concubines. A man would have many concubines, and the women born by these concubines were all daughters of concubines, but they would be placed under the name of the master's wife. The most favorite was to marry their own cousin. On the surface, they were called cousins, but in fact, they might not have any blood relationship at all. It was just because they were placed under the name of the master's wife, and the master's wife was their aunt, so the women born by these concubines had to be called cousins. The third point was the point of strengthening the relationship. They all believed that in the 3rd generation, the relationship would gradually drift apart, and only through marriage could this layer of interest be locked again. Most importantly, they did not know the harm of marrying close relatives. Even if there were some deformities, they would often blame it on the women, saying that these women were indecent or were cursed. Chapter 2005. The people present did not know this, but Zhang Feng's heart was as clear as a mirror. He smiled and explained, "What you said is not wrong. Everyone thinks that it is very good to marry close relatives, and it can prevent the family bloodline from being tainted. But do you know the harm of marrying close relatives?" "There is harm in marrying close relatives?" Li Shimin looked at Zhang Feng with a shocked face. In his impression, many high-ranking officials were married close relatives, and there were also some clans with different surnames. These guys still thought that there was nothing wrong. Wait a minute, it seemed not necessarily. The concubine of the Taiyuan Wang clan master's illegitimate son gave birth to a baby a few days ago, and it seemed that there was something wrong with the baby's head. Moreover, this illegitimate son seemed to have married his cousin. Could it be that what Feng Zi said was true? The others also looked at Zhang Feng with a doubtful face. Because in their influence, many people were the products of close relatives. How could those people be fine? When it came to Feng Zi's mouth, why did it become a sinful thing? Li Yuan was somewhat puzzled. He looked deeply at Zhang Feng, trying to see something, but he could not see anything. He could only ask, "Feng Zi, is what you said true or false?" Zhang Feng nodded heavily, laughing in his heart at the ignorance of the ancients. But thinking that he was also an ancient person, he could only explain, "There should be many examples of close relatives marrying close relatives around you, right? How are those people? Not to mention other things, at least half of the people who marry close relatives are mentally retarded. I can guarantee this." Hearing this, everyone lowered their heads and pondered. Scenes of marriage in the past appeared in their minds. The cousins of the Xan family, the cousins of the Gu family, the cousins of the Ji family, these were all close relatives. Their children really seemed to have some problems. Not to mention all of them, at least half of them were mentally retarded. However, the other half seemed to be more intelligent than ordinary people. What was going on? Li Shimin asked curiously, "Feng Zi, I admit that what you said just now makes sense. There may be some harm in marrying close relatives, but what about those who have been intelligent since they were young?" Zhang Feng smiled, took a sip of tea, and said, "Those who have been smart since they were young are just lucky, but they also have misfortune. That is, their lifespan is shorter than ordinary people. Anyway, there is no benefit in marrying close relatives. You just need to know this." He didn't intend to explain too much. He couldn't possibly tell them about the genetic factors, the mutations that couldn't be produced by their descendants, and the harmful genes that were passed on to their descendants. Even if he did, the people present probably wouldn't understand. However, Li Yuan was a bit stupefied. "Feng Zi, just now you talked a lot about the dangers of marrying close relatives. What exactly do you mean? Do you want to use this method to deal with the clan?" Old Master Li is still the one who sees things clearly. Zhang Feng glanced at Li Yuan and didn't forget to praise him. Then he glanced at everyone. "The dangers of close relatives that I said just now are just paving the way for the marriage restriction order. Think about it. Once the marriage restriction order is issued, what will happen if 3 of the families are not restricted? They will definitely worry that the marriage restriction order will fall on their heads one day. Although they are not afraid, it is not good to refuse on the surface. Therefore, they will definitely cherish the resources and madly let the people in the clan marry. In this way, it is inevitable that they will marry close relatives. Of course, this is a good thing for them. However, they don't know the dangers of marrying close relatives. As long as there are 10 pairs, it is guaranteed that half of them will be mentally retarded. In this way, after a long time, the population of these clans will definitely decrease sharply. Hearing this, Xianxia frowned, because he was somewhat dissatisfied with Fengzi's approach. Although the idea of marrying close relatives has not been implemented yet, if it is true, this is the idea of exterminating the clan. There will definitely be a storm. If the people of the 5 surnames and 7 hopes know the truth that Fengzi is the mastermind, it will probably lead to huge revenge. He looked at Zhang Feng worriedly and said, Fengzi, your method is a bit vicious. If the people of the 5 surnames and 7 hopes know the truth, I'm afraid. Originally, Li Yuan was listening excitedly. When he saw Xianxia interrupt, he was immediately dissatisfied. However, it was not good for him to flare up. He could only faintly pander. Bashi, this is your fault. It's not like you don't know what kind of people these people of the 5 surnames and 7 hopes are. Fengzi's plan, he glanced at Zhang Feng and seemed to have a guilty conscience. He coughed twice and said, this plan is not as vicious as you said. Besides, marrying close relatives has been happening since ancient times. Fengzi just raised a point of view. It doesn't matter. Moreover, even if marrying close relatives is really harmful, will those clans be worried? They can't wait for the whole clan to marry close relatives. There was nothing wrong with these words. The words were rough, but the truth was not rough. Even if the people of the 5 surnames and 7 hopes knew that marrying close relatives was harmful, they would probably not prohibit it, because they thought that their bloodline was noble and could not be tarnished. Moreover, wouldn't half of them be smarter than ordinary people? Would the people of the 5 surnames and 7 hopes refuse such temptation?